Chapter 340. The war is over. Clang! With a single ringing stroke, Nethin slid his sword home into its scabbard. The blade had withstood Shanks's full-force strike, a breathtaking display of raw power and masterful swordsmanship. Though Nethin's arm throbbed from the impact, the weapon showed no lasting damage. He held Shanks's gaze for a tense moment, then turned on his heel and leapt away. He landed lightly on the rim of the crater, took a confident step forward, and began to walk away. At once, Admiral Fujitora sheathed his sword. Beside him, the fishman holstered his revolver, and the arcs of crackling lightning around Helding's body dissolved into the air. Even the red-haired pirates, the Whitebeard crew, and the marine forces fell in line behind Nethin, opening a clear path through the remnants of battle. The great warriors of both pirate and navy alike swallowed hard as he passed, none daring to challenge his exit. From the Whitebeard pirates' stronghold to the marine admirals at their posts, every eye followed Nethin's retreating figure. At the edge of the crater, Momotu watched him go, knuckles whitening around the hilt of his own blade, but he did not move to stop him. Silently, the assembled fighters witnessed Nethin's departure. The smoke and fury of battle still lingered in the air, but for now, the war was over. Shanks slid his blade back into its scabbard with a sharp clang. No one noticed that the ice beneath his feet spider-webbed with cracks, while the very spot where Nethin had stood remained perfectly smooth. After 3 days and nights of brutal fighting, Nethin, his strength all but spent, had still managed to land a blow powerful enough to fracture the deck. Shanks didn't bother to turn his head. He merely tracked the departing figure with his peripheral vision and then looked away. That kid. Behind him, Beckman lingered among the red-haired crew's officers. He drew on his cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke as he watched Nethin's retreating back. He'd felt it. Shanks had been just the slightest fraction slower in that last exchange. Insignificant on its own, perhaps, but telling when you just witnessed Nethin conquer Whitebeard after 3 days of combat. Whitebeard's defeat was neither a fluke nor a slight. It was proof that the title of World's Strongest would change hands today. A warm, lazy voice cut through the charged air. "What do you make of it, Kuzan?" The speaker stood at the fringe of the battlefield, his presence radiating golden light. The man called the Yellow Monkey tilted his head toward the ice-born admiral in jade, known far and wide as the Green Pheasant, and waited for his answer. Aokiji drew in a slow breath, his eyes flicking coldly between Shanks, Whitebeard, and the rest of the gathering crews. At last, he turned on his heel and called out, "Fall back. Nethin's gone." Across the battlefield, the vice-admirals bristled at the order. Now only the Whitebeard pirates remained in force, and defeating them alone would be no impossible task. But any further aggression risked Shanks's wrath. If the red-haired pirates chose to intervene, the Navy would find itself fighting on 2 fronts, against Whitebeard's men and the full strength of the Red Hairs. Aokiji's squadron began to peel away like a tide receding from the shore. Heavily armed warships turned and fled, leaving only 2 great pirate banners to claim the island's plains. Shanks watched the last marine vessel vanish over the horizon. He offered no words of triumph, only a curt nod as he shifted his gaze to Whitebeard and his officers. Then, without another glance, he signaled his own crews to weigh anchor and departed. Marco and the other Whitebeard commanders remained rooted in place, forming a loose circle around their fallen comrades. Their eyes trailed Shanks's retreating silhouette, but none made a move to pursue. As the red-haired pirates slipped beyond the edges of the bay, an uneasy hush settled over the island. With both the Marines and the Red Hairs gone, only the Whitebeard flag still flew over Iceberg, Jia Island, and Whitebeard's war council assembled beneath it, already plotting their next course of action. The Battle of Eightwall, a clash destined to be etched in the annals of the great pirate era, finally came to an end. Whitebeard, who had reigned unchallenged as the greatest pirate of the seas for decades, was at last unseated by the fearsome ghost-handed Nethin. With Whitebeard's defeat, the world's strongest title passed into new hands, and the balance of power shifted forever. More than 2 weeks have passed since that titanic struggle. Now the Ghost Hand pirates drift off the deserted shore of Bika Island, their ships anchored in silent repose. Injuries that once threatened to cripple fleet morale, Battle scars borne by Admiral Fujitora, Ranji, Shiryu, and countless others have nearly vanished, thanks to the combined expertise of Surgeon Trafalgaro and healer Gertz, who employ the miraculous surgical fruit and healing fruit in tandem. Even grievous wounds mend with astonishing speed. Ordinary injuries are now little more than a memory. In the eyes of the world, the Ghost Hand pirates have surged past the legendary Whitebeard crew to claim the crown as the era's preeminent force. Crowds in every port speak Nethin's name with both awe and fear. Yet in the victor's quarters aboard the flagship, Nethin broods. For all their glory, the battle exacted a devastating toll on the middle and lower ranks, the backbone of his fleet. Those losses weigh heavily on him now, a sharp reminder that supreme power often comes at a steep price. Casualty reports have just come in. Every captain, including Shiryu of the Rain and Lafitte, survived unscathed. Yet we've lost 2 vice captains, and over half of our junior and middle ranks lie dead or wounded. The Ghost Hand Pirates' 7 squadrons are largely filled with Shanghaied seamen and underworld cutthroats, so such losses are catastrophic and all but impossible to replace quickly. Although our frontline combat strength remains intact, the manpower drain will severely hamper our ability to patrol and govern the vast maritime territories of the 10 nations. In the vaulted throne room of Sky Island's palace, Nethin reclined on Daoyun's ornate settee and beckoned Robin forward. "How many new hands have joined us in the past few days?" Robin stepped in, parchment in hand. 37 applicants, my lord, but I'm afraid most are more interested in burning, looting, and killing than in maintaining order. Nethin shook his head. "We need disciplined sailors, not marauders. Such men would be worse than useless when it comes to managing the seas. Tell them we're closed to recruits for now, and anyone who can't pull their weight isn't welcome." Nethin still had power to spare. From the very start, he'd never planned to recruit that murderous pirate crew for himself. If he'd wanted to, he could have handed them to Sugar and treated them like expendable pawns. After all, without the world government's authority behind him, it's nearly impossible to raise an army quickly through forced enlistment. Robin set the dossier on the coffee table. "Even though you've struck so many blows against them, their reach remains vast," she remarked. "The world government still encompasses over 170 nations, more than half the world. And these pirates? They hold sway over just 34 islands, 21 of which are little more than dots on the sea. Of the remaining 13, only 4 qualify as significant strongholds." Nethin shrugged. "Precisely why, if we want the legitimacy to challenge them, we must first unite the New World," he said quietly. "That now is a truly monumental task. The world government now governs more than half of the world's 170-plus nations, over 170 large islands in all, while Nethin commands only 4. His territories are scattered across distant seas, hemmed in on every side by rival powers: Kaido's Beast Sea, the Red-Haired Sea, the Whitebeard Sea, the Red Earth continent, and the Navy's central stronghold. To expand his reach, Nethin knows he must either pick a fight with that one of the 4 emperors or go head-to-head with the Navy itself. There is, however, another path. If he can get his hands on the Soul fruit, he could absorb the potent abilities of any one of the Emperor-level pirates. With that power fueling the Ghost Hand pirates, Nethin would finally have the strength to challenge the Navy headquarters, and perhaps even the world government, on equal footing. Chapter 341, Germa 66. Nethin was deep in meditation when the Denden Mushi in Robin's pocket suddenly chimed. "Hello?" Robin lifted the snail to her ear. A familiar voice crackled through. "Lafitte. Captain Robin, Lord Nethin isn't with you?" Lafitte had once called him Captain Nethin, but after the Ghost Hand pirates dissolved and restructured into 7 squadrons following their conquest of the 10,000 kingdoms, he'd adopted the more formal title, Lord Nethin. Robin tilted her head, caught his eye, and passed him the Den Mushi. Nethin accepted it smoothly, leaning back against the soft white upholstery of the Daoyun sofa. "What's the matter, Lafitte?" he asked, his tone leisurely. A hint of amusement colored Lafitte's voice. "You'll remember the business empire the Big Mom pirates left behind. As one of the former 4 emperors, Big Mom's reach wasn't confined to the 10,000 kingdoms. Her underworld network spanned the entire Grand Line. Most of their enterprises have since been folded into the ghost hand pirates. Nethan frowned, sitting up a little to give his full attention. I'm listening. Why are you calling? Captain Lafitte leaned back against the rail, arms folded. The Big Mom pirates left behind a dessert factory here in Beihai, he said. I was going to claim it once you finished off their crew. Nethan frowned, recalling how recently he'd brought down Big Mom's forces. I never got the chance. First I ran into that marine science base incident, then crossed paths with Whitebeard. Lafitte shrugged. Exactly. You've been busy. So busy, in fact, that the East Blue remains untouched and the West Blue has slipped by entirely. But I had my sights on the North Blue after our duel with Whitebeard's men. I assumed I'd be the first to scoop up Big Mom's abandoned holdings there. He paused, brows knitting together. Only now I hear someone beat me to it. The factory's been wiped out. Nethan's eyes narrowed. At a time like this, we just crippled the Whitebeard pirates, and before that, the 4 emperors had the New World under their thumb. For anyone to move in now, they must be braver or crazier than I thought. Lafitte offered a wry grin. Or maybe not what you're imagining. There's more to this than a rival crew making a bold play. He met Nethan's gaze steadily. Trust me, we're going to want every scrap of information before we decide our next move. Nethan set his teacup on the low table, listening as Lafitte's voice crackled through the comlink, amusement dancing in every word. Here's the situation, Lafitte began. That workshop the Big Mom pirates left behind, it's located in the Kingdom of Skull, out in the North Blue, and just recently, a rebellion broke out there. Nethan said nothing. He lifted the cup again, took a measured sip of warm tea, and regarded the dark wood floorboards beneath him. There's your real problem, Lafitte continued. This rebel faction got hold of a fortune from somewhere, hired an army, clashed with Skull's royal forces, and overthrew the kingdom's government. The place was practically in ruins by the time the dust settled. Nethan frowned. Sounds like total chaos. Chaos is the norm when a country isn't aligned with the world government, Lafitte replied with a shrug. Skull was never under the Gorosei's direct command. Weak institutions, corrupt nobles, the whole mess. Big Mom had some influence in those waters once, but since we cleared the 10-nation sea, her hold evaporated. From the balcony, Nico Robin's soft voice drifted in. So what do we do now? Nethan turned to her, chin resting on his hand. Beihai is miles away from here. Even if we manage to dismantle this new regime, holding and governing a distant kingdom is a logistical nightmare. And there's another piece missing. Who exactly backed those mercenaries? Lafitte's chuckle came low and confident through the line. Ah, that's the interesting part. Those hired guns aren't just run-of-the-mill pirates or local bandits. He paused, letting the words hang between them. They belong to a faction you'll want to know more about. Silence fell in Nethan's quarters as he processed that final hint. Across the deck, the afternoon sun glinted off the sea, and even Robin's usually serene expression tightened with curiosity. Very well, Nethan said at last, his voice cool and controlled. Tell us everything you know. On my way, Lafitte promised, and the line went dead. Nethan stood, smoothing the fabric of his coat. Beside him, Robin joined the side of the ship's rail, her eyes reflecting the horizon. Looks like we've got ourselves another tangled web, Robin mused. Nethan allowed himself a thin smile. The seas are full of them. Let's find out who's pulling the strings this time. And with that resolve, they turned to prepare for whatever storm was coming their way. Germa 66 holds no territory of its own, but, as a recognized faction, it enjoys the rare privilege of attending the World Conference. When Lafitte mentioned this, Nethan, who'd barely been listening, suddenly looked up, surprise flashing in his eyes. Lafitte continued. After our fight wiped out the Big Mom pirates in that region, they secretly removed their Jolly Roger and tried to set themselves up in one of her old factories. Naturally, Germa's forces moved in. A skirmish broke out, and those imposters were completely routed. He paused, then explained more soberly. Only afterward did Germa's commanders learn that the site really belonged to Big Mom's crew. They'd simply stumbled onto it and assumed it was unclaimed. Once they realized the mistake, they issued a formal apology. No posturing, no tough talk. In today's world, you don't provoke a shadow like the Ghost Hand pirates without paying the price. Nethan nodded as he absorbed the story. He wasn't surprised. He knew the man who led Germa 66 was none other than Judge Vinsmoke, Sanji's father. Judge was a hard, pragmatic leader who openly scorned weakness and cared only for strength and gain. If anyone understood the value of self-preservation and cautious honor, it was him. As soon as Germa's forces realized they'd overstepped, they fell into line, offered apologies, and made sure no lasting damage was done. Nethin leaned back, folding his arms. In this world of unpredictable pirate lords and merciless navies, even a small misstep could spark a war. And the Ghost Hand pirates in particular were the last straw no one wanted to break. Nethin lounged on the quarterdeck, his dark eyes sweeping over the bowed heads of the 100 Beasts pirates. They might have been brutal by ordinary standards, but in the shadow of his Ghost Hand crew, they looked like timid cubs. Gage, the largest among them, trembled so violently that even his scars seemed to quiver. He understood all too well that a single misstep, an insult, a wrong look, would cost him his life within minutes. If this were someone like Monkey D. Luffy, Gage might have drawn his sword on the spot, carefree about the fallout. The four emperors and the galaxy's mightiest crews often acted on impulse, heedless of consequences. But Nethin was different. His restraint was as formidable as his reputation. Hearing their panicked apologies and seeing their genuine ignorance of protocol, he chose mercy over massacre. "Consider this your one warning," Nethin said, voice calm but absolute. He rose, straightening the dark coat that bore his crew's emblem. "You may go." A ripple of relief spread through the assembled pirates as they backed away, hastily stumbling toward their ship. Once they disappeared over the rail, Nethin turned to his first mate. "I've just wrapped up the Whitebeard remnant sweep," he said, stretching his arms. "Honestly, I'm a bit lazy." His mate raised an eyebrow. "The world government will want me to head north, pick a fight with Germa 66, Nethin continued. "They've got resources, enough to make an admiral like Fujitora or Shiryu of the Rain lead the charge. One blow at them, and New Kama land aside, they'll scream for backup. Then we'd be wading through a full-scale war with the Marines and the government. Sounds exhausting, doesn't it?" His mate gave a soft chuckle. "Then we'll stand down, boss." Nethin nodded. "Exactly. For now, let's enjoy calm seas." He gazed at the horizon, a faint smile curving his lips. "There'll be plenty of battles ahead, ones worth fighting." And with that, the Ghost Hand pirates sailed on, leaving chaos in their wake, but sparing those wise enough not to cross Nethin. Lafitte leaned back in his chair, a faint smile playing at his lips. "The Vinsmoke family wants to make a connection with us. You know, the Vinsmokes who rule Germa 66. Nethin nodded, crossing one leg over the other. "I'm aware." He paused, studying Lafitte. "But that's dangerously naive. We don't want to become Germa's burden, and you still want to sail under our flag?" Lafitte raised an eyebrow. Nethin continued. "Germa 66 holds no permanent territory, so the world government treats them as a non-entity. Their obsession with human cloning and modification only makes them more expendable. At any moment, the world government could strip them of their allied status and obliterate them." He leaned forward. "If we plug ourselves into the Ghost Hand pirates now, we gain a tiger's roar without growing fangs. Even if the world government does come for Germa 66, they'll think twice before tangling with the Ghost Hand pirates." Lafitte's smile faded. "What exactly are you getting at?" Nethin let his grin deepen. "Germa's plan is pure fantasy. They expect the Ghost Hand pirates to shield them for nothing? Protection always comes at a price." Nethin rubbed his chin thoughtfully. The newly formed nations were dangerously short of officers and administrators, and deploying Germa 66's mass-produced clones would instantly fill the critical gaps in their middle and lower-level ranks. He looked up and gave his orders. "Tell them that if they're prepared to commit their entire personnel to our command, I'll consider it." Chapter 42. Negotiation. The North Sea. In a remote sector of these restless waters, several ships bearing the Germa 66 pennant drifted steadily over the swells. At the heart of the largest vessel lay a grand cabin, its interior a study in aristocratic refinement. 2 plush sofas flanked a glass-topped coffee table, and a handful of chairs were arranged with military precision. Vinsmoke Gage, supreme commander of Germa 66, lounged in the most sumptuous chair, a porcelain cup of steaming cat poop coffee clutched in one gloved hand. He eyed his subordinate standing stiffly by the table and asked, "What did they say?" The aide hesitated, cheeks reddening. "The Ghost Hand pirates. They told us that if we're willing to join their fleet, they might consider taking us on." Gage snorted. What grand generosity. On the sofa beside him, the second son, Niji, let out an exasperated sigh. Their eldest brother, Yiji, lifted his teacup to his lips and stared coolly at the aide. After all, they are the Ghost Hand pirates. They just defeated Whitebeard's crew not 2 weeks ago. But to expect us to beg for membership really makes us look like cast-offs, doesn't it? From across the table, the fourth son, Yanji, leaned back in his chair and chuckled. Only Reiju, their sister, remained silent. With one slender finger pressed thoughtfully to her lips, she regarded her family with unreadable eyes. A tense pause settled over the room. Each member of Germa 66 weighed the unspoken question. Should they swallow their pride and ally with the Ghost Hand pirates, merging two formidable powers, or strike out alone, as they always had? After a tense silence, Reiju finally spoke up. "Well, we did unknowingly demolish their property, so it's no surprise they're furious." Her words immediately eased Gaji's rigid posture. The Ghost Hand pirates were notorious, and their haughty demands had been over the top, but given that Reiju had literally crushed their holdings, a little outrage was only natural. They ought to count themselves lucky the pirates had only yelled at them instead of starting a brawl. Expecting a friendly chat under those circumstances was wishful thinking. Gaji exchanged a worried glance with Reiju. "So, is the entire crew implicated in this?" She shrugged. "I wouldn't put it past the Ghost Hand to try recruiting every last one of us. Aside from the world government, they're the strongest force on the seas. Germa 66, by comparison, has long coveted control of the North Blue, yet they've run into setback after setback, even facing the threat of being expunged by the world government. True, the North Blue isn't as perilous as the Grand Line or the New World, but don't be fooled, dominating it is no simple feat." The two siblings fell silent, each lost in the implications of having crossed one of the sea's most fearsome crews. On the Grand Line, countless pirate crews have spilled forth from the North Blue, and many islands serve as power bases for formidable warlords. Yet the balance of power here is far from settled. Nethin's Ghost Hand pirates, though led by extraordinarily strong captains, suffer from a critical lack of manpower. They've only existed for a few short years, refuse to recruit ordinary freebooters, and their backing pales next to that of the four emperors. Gage, who commands Germa 66, recognizes the opportunity and the risk. If every member of the Ghost Hand pirates were to bow to Nethin, it would mean ceding authority to a rival he's not yet ready to serve. Gage prides himself on independence. What he truly seeks is an alliance, not subordination. According to his scouts, the captains under Nethin are nearly unmatched in one-on-one combat, but their fleet is too small to hold territory or project force over the long term. That's where Germa 66 comes in. Wealthy, well-organized, and unburdened by the Ghost Hand's recruiting customs, Germa can supply middle and lower-tier troops to plug the gaps in Nethin's ranks. Should Nethin refuse the offer, Germa's growth will simply slow, and temporary administrative attacks may arise on any newly secured island. In the end, Gage is confident the short-term inconvenience is worth the chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with an up-and-coming pirate power, rather than trailing behind it. Chapter Text: Negotiations in the Sea of 10,000 Kingdoms. Nethin stared at the reports streaming across his desk, tension knotting his shoulders. If Germa 66 continued down its current path, they risked expulsion from the world government, and worse, outright annihilation at its hands. How could they possibly forge an alliance under such threat? He replayed the plan in his mind. With the Ghost Hand pirates' help, Germa 66 could seize control of the North Sea. In return, Germa would dispatch mid- and low-level support to the pirates, a perfectly balanced exchange of power and resources. It was, Nethin decided, their best and perhaps only chance for survival. A month went by in a blur of coded transmissions and shadowy rendezvous. Germa operatives coordinated with the Ghost Hand pirates' lieutenants, funneling intelligence on Big Mom's North Sea holdings straight to Lafitte. In turn, the pirates assisted Germa agents as they moved to claim strategic ports and hidden outposts. Gradually, months of mutual suspicion melted away, the two factions reached a firm, preliminary understanding. But achieving this breakthrough came at a price. Word of Germa's overtures to the Pirate Alliance spread through world government channels faster than they'd anticipated. The response was predictably icy. Diplomatic overtures turned to veiled threats, and the world government began to cut off official ties. Faced with mounting hostility on one front and an untested truce on the other, Nethin knew he had to act quickly. He convened his closest advisors that evening beneath the glow of the war room's holographic map. "Our next move is clear," he announced. "We must meet with the Ghost Hand pirates in person. I'll sail to the Sea of 10,000 Kingdoms for direct negotiations. Only then can we ensure our alliance holds firm and show the world government there's no turning back." Murmurs of agreement rippled around the table. Despite the risks, everyone understood the stakes. Germa 66 could not afford failure now. Nethin gave a curt nod, determination shining in his eyes. "Prepare the stealth cruiser," he ordered. "At first light, we set course for the 10,000 Kingdoms. This is our chance to tip the balance of power and secure our future." Outside the war room's reinforced doors, the hull of the cruiser trembled as engines roared to life. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the Ghost Hand pirates awaited. And as the cold sea wind lashed the deck, Nethin felt the weight of destiny settle over him once more. Half a month later, at the dawn of the 19th year of the Great Pirate Era, the Germa 66 fleet slipped into the seas surrounding the All Nations. Their destination, Cake Island, the heart of Big Mom's territory. Offshore, Vinsmoke Gage stood on the deck of his flagship, flanked by his daughter Reiju and his three sons, Nithin, formerly Ross, Jiaji, and Niji. A hush fell over the boys as the shoreline of Cake Island came into view. According to the latest intelligence, this had once been the Big Mom Pirates' forward base. Though recent reconstruction had patched its walls and rebuilt its streets, the lingering scars of war were unmistakable to anyone who had seen battle. Nethin took a cautious step forward, studying a vast factory that dominated the island's center. Its hulking silhouette and utilitarian design were jarring. This massive structure looked more like an arms foundry than a home for a pirate crew. He frowned. "This can't be where Mother lives. It's too cold somehow." Lafitte, Gage's right hand, glanced over and shook his head with a half-smile. "Not down here," he said. "You're looking in the wrong direction." The three brothers tilted their heads, searching for what Lafitte meant. Above them, the sky was a brilliant blue canvas streaked with drifting clouds, nothing more. They exchanged puzzled looks. "Up there," Lafitte said again, pointing straight overhead. Nethin blinked, then raised his eyes higher, squinting against the sunlight. Somewhere above the cloud line, something was hidden, though what it was, none of them could yet tell. The real arrival point lay out of sight, suspended high above Cake Island, waiting to reveal itself. Behind them, Gage's voice rumbled with unspoken promise. The time had come for Germa 66 to claim its prize, and for Nethin, Jiazi, and Niji, this would be an arrival they'd never forget. A group of figures strode forward, each carrying a curious device that looked like an oversized shell. They ignored Nethin and the others, coming directly to Captain Lafitte and saluting him with precision. "All right," Lafitte said, returning the salute. "Get us up there." "Yes, sir," one of them replied. Immediately, they began adjusting the shell-like machines in their hands. Within seconds, a billowing white cloud formed above them, and they arranged more than a dozen of the devices beneath its underside. Lafitte turned to Nethin, Niji, Reiju, and the rest, a confident smile on his face. "This is our special transport," he announced. "It'll carry us upward." Nethin blinked at the drifting cloud, skepticism giving way to curiosity. He stepped forward alongside Niji and Reiju. Lafitte followed close behind. "Brace yourselves," Lafitte called out. Suddenly the shells hissed in unison, each one releasing a powerful blast of air. With a roar, the entire cloud shot skyward, lifting everyone off the ground. "Oh," Niji exclaimed. Reiju's eyes widened in surprise. None of them had expected, nor ever seen, a machine that could truly fly. Yet here they were, rising steadily into the open sky. Chapter 343, Reiju and Robin. Reiju leaned on the edge of the cloud seat, one hand propping up her chin as the world dropped away beneath them. They had all worn memory steel armor and carried the latest flight gear, yet none had ever flown above 1,000 meters. Now, with each passing moment, the air grew thinner. Lafitte caught Jaji's eye and offered a small, knowing smile. "Be careful up here. The altitude can play tricks on you." Jaji nodded, shading his eyes as he stared upward. "If I'm right, the Ghost Hand Pirate's stronghold must be far above us. It's a bit surreal, but then that's exactly what you'd expect from 4 emperors at the height of their power." They climbed steadily. After only a few minutes, the cloud seat had ascended to 8,000 meters. Far off on the horizon, a colossal mass of cloud hovered at 10,000 meters, its contours impossibly solid. "Is that the legendary Sky Island?" Gaji's voice cracked with awe. "It can't be real, can it?" Reiju straightened, her eyes bright with excitement. Below them, the sea of clouds ebbed and flowed like a living thing. Above, that distant, floating plateau awaited. A hidden realm whispered of in myths and songs. And now, it lay just within their reach. They'd all heard rumors of Sky Isle, but none had ever set foot there, and some even thought it a myth. Now, as their white cloud chariot drifted above the mist, the island revealed itself at last. Emerald forests clung to floating plateaus, strange blossoms glowed at every turn, and the whole place shimmered in an otherworldly light. Reiju stared in awe at Bika's graceful spires and drifting fog. A pang of envy struck her, how she longed to linger here, even for a single day. The scenery was more beautiful than any tale could capture. At the edge of the plateau, the chariot settled to the ground. Captain Lafitte stepped forward and bowed. "This way, please," he said, gesturing for Gage and the others to follow. Without waiting another moment, he led them along a narrow, winding path. Winged islanders, native inhabitants of Baika, flanked the road. Each paused to offer a respectful salute to Lafitte as he passed. In this realm, he and the other captains ranked only beneath Lord Nethan himself. Vice-captains, by contrast, were rarely permitted here. Most had never seen Sky Isle, and none could set foot on it without Nethan's express permission. "Keep your voices down," Lafitte whispered, offering a small smile. "The islanders prize quiet above all." Before long, they arrived at Bayun Palace, the magnificent heart of Bika. Ivory towers rose into the sky, their rooftops linked by bridges of mist. The air was cool and hushed, as though the island itself paused to welcome them. Lafitte turned to the group, pride shining in his eyes. Their long journey had led them here, to a place more wondrous than any legend. Nethan's words carried an unexpected weight, and for a moment even he felt a shiver of gravity settle over him. His 3 reformed sons, Nishi, Leiju, and the youngest, remained impassive. As enhanced beings, emotion and fear were foreign to their faces. They filed through the palace gates in silence. Just inside, a young woman from Sky Island stepped forward. Her hair was spun from sunlight, her eyes as blue as a summer sky, and her features so delicate she might have been born of clouds. She offered them a gentle smile, then beckoned. "Please follow me. I will show you the way." "An angel," Nishi breathed, while the others stared as if transfixed. Only Leiju shook his head with mild exasperation. "Enough," Nethan ordered, his tone brooking no argument. "Keep your heads about you." There was no mistaking it. His sons were warriors in every respect. Fast, strong, unbreakable. Yet they shared one glaring flaw, an all-too-human appetite for beauty and temptation. In that regard, they were cut from nearly the same cloth as Sanji. Still, they obeyed Nethan without hesitation. Loyalty had been woven into them from the moment they were reborn. Their first and only priority was to protect their Mas, Tur. Nethan had long been whispered to be Gaji's son, but in truth Gaji never treated him like family. To Gaji, Nethan was simply the most trusted soldier he had ever trained. Now, guided by the young woman from Nakong Island, Nethan pressed deeper into Bayun Palace. They passed row upon row of ornate, jade-tiled pavilions before arriving at the inner sanctuary. Inside, Nethan stood before a soaring window, hands clasped behind his back. Beyond the glass lay nothing but the quiet expanse of the empty isle. He watched it for a moment, then, sensing movement at the outer gates, he turned. Gaji and his entourage were approaching. His eyes were calm, so calm in fact that everyone who met his gaze felt a sudden rush of arrogance emanating from him. It wasn't an ordinary confidence, but something far more oppressive. The marble floor beneath Nethan's feet quivered with fine spiderweb cracks. In response, the palace's ancient Tao-woven stones congealed them almost as quickly as they appeared, as if the very walls were drinking in the force. Gaji stopped under the archway, and for a heartbeat, his face paled. Each breath he drew felt as though he were carrying a mountain on his chest. He understood then why his son, though he'd never acknowledged him, was never to be underestimated. Nethin's silent dominance spoke louder than any weapon. And so, the silent triad held its ground. Nethin at the window, the girl of Nakong Island at his side, and Gaji with his men at the threshold, all caught in the hush before whatever was to come. At that moment, Niji, Yongji, and the others all paled. They didn't stumble backward, but cold sweat sprang up on their brows. Nethin's aura, so overpowering, so absolute, pressed down on them like a physical weight. Jiaji felt 3 distinct beads of perspiration roll down his forehead as he silently reassessed just how terrifying Nethin truly was. Without lifting a finger, Nethin had unleashed a domineering presence so overwhelming it nearly immobilized them all. No wonder he was known as the strongest man in the world, even earning the fearsome title, Ghost-Handed Nethin. The oppressive atmosphere lingered for just a few seconds before Nethin withdrew it as quietly as he had summoned it. But by then, everyone was drenched in cold sweat. None more so than Reiju. Born between Sanji and Niji, she combined human emotions with extraordinary physical gifts and strength. Her unique makeup meant she felt Nethin's coercive aura all the more keenly, her clothes clinging to her as she struggled to steady her racing heart. "That man," she whispered, voice trembling with awe and dread. Nethin's broad silhouette filled the window frame, his imposing presence drawing every eye in the chamber. Reiju felt her heart skip a beat, but she refused to show it. Instead, she met his gaze with a serene, almost approving smile the moment his stern arrogance softened. "That quiet confidence," she thought. "I like it." With a slow nod, Nethin stepped away from the window and beckoned Gage and the others forward. Jiaji paused at the entrance, offering a respectful bow. "Your Excellency Ghost Hand, your courage is legendary. I apologize for arriving so unannounced." "Don't mention it," Nethin said easily. He strode to the head of the long table and settled into the seat of honor. As one of the 4 emperors, he knew the value of projecting strength first, his flame-red hair cascading around a white beard, every feature radiating authority. A commanding air, he believed, was more persuasive than any plea. None of the reformed warriors, Jiaji included, felt genuine fear in his presence, despite the weight of his earlier display. Yet respect ran deep. They recognized the power Nethin wielded and remained perfectly still, waiting for him to speak before making any presumptuous move. The young Sky Island attendant who'd guided Jiaji and the others earlier slipped quietly into the palace chamber, carrying a silver tray. On it sat several cups of steaming, emerald green tea, Sky Island's famed specialty. As the tray came to rest, tea on the lacquered table, Nethin's stern expression softened ever so slightly. The rigid aura he carried as one of the 4 emperors and the self-proclaimed world's strongest wavered in the face of such simple courtesy. Reiju lifted her cup with a graceful smile and sipped. The delicate fragrance of the brew filled the room, as though washing away the tension of moments ago. Nethin inclined his head in appreciation. "Sky Island tea is a rare luxury beyond these shores," he observed, his voice calm. "Your kindness is noted." Reiju's eyes sparkled. "Then you must savor every drop." She set her cup down, her composure as elegant as the courts of Ijiniji could never match. Nethin returned her smile and raised his own cup. "Perhaps," he replied lightly, "but if I remain here long enough, I might enjoy it every day." He dipped his cup to his lips once more, the warmth of the tea mirroring the thaw in his guarded heart. Reiju's lips curved into a gentle smile. "Is this all right?" she asked. Gage sat quietly at the table, sipping his tea, yet inwardly he was full of admiration. He'd been racking his brain for a way to get closer to Nethin, and Reiju had just handed him the perfect opportunity, far better than any awkward small talk he might have attempted himself. Nethin returned her smile with equal warmth. He was about to say something when a soft voice called from behind them. "Vinsmoke Reiju, eldest daughter of the family. If I remember correctly, your ability involves poison, a most effective skill against any adversary." Robin stepped forward, her own smile calm and confident. She inclined her head in greeting, her eyes flicking briefly to Nethin before settling on Reiju. Chapter 344, Unequal. Nethan paused mid-sip, the teacup hovering beneath his lips. He didn't need to turn around to know exactly what Robin was wearing on his face. Those eyes curved into crescents, and that mischievous smile said it all. "It seems you're well acquainted with our intelligence," Robin said, feigning modesty. "I'm honored you think so highly of us. After all, overseeing operations means running the intelligence network, and anyone who comes calling should know what they're dealing with." He tilted his head, grin unwavering, and slid into the chair beside Nethan. Suppressing a sigh, Nethan ignored the silent exchange of smiles between Robin and Raiju and fixed his gaze instead on Gage. "So, Gage," he said coolly, "you came here to discuss this. Cooperation, yes?" Gage, who had been racking his brain for the best way to bring it up, visibly relaxed. He met the amused looks of Robin and Raiju without wincing. Then he turned back to Nethan and said, "Exactly. Since Captain Robin is already so well informed, I assume you, Captain Ghosthand, have your own insights into our situation?" Nethan offered a half shrug. "I've picked up a few things." Gage leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I used to be part of the Science Corps, working side by side with Dr. Vegapunk," he began, his voice even but charged with pride. "We drifted apart over certain philosophical differences, but I never stopped pushing the frontier of bloodline factor research and cloning technology." He swept his right hand through the air. "Look over there." Across the room, a line of youths stood motionless, Niji, Raiju, and several others whose names Nethan hadn't yet learned. Each one wore identical black and silver combat suits, their expressions blank, almost doll-like. "These are my children," Gage said, voice swelling with satisfaction. "My crowning scientific achievements. I designed them to be the perfect soldiers. Thanks to advanced cybernetic enhancements and gene editing, they possess strength, speed, and reflexes far beyond any ordinary fighter. In a real engagement, they can dismantle an enemy unit in seconds." He paused, letting that sink in, then continued, "And they're just the beginning. Behind them waits an entire army of clone soldiers, physically superior to ordinary humans, utterly fearless and conditioned to obey my every command without hesitation. This force is why the Northern Sea Powers quake at my name." Gage's eyes gleamed. "It's true, I can't rival the absolute might of the New World's top fleets and pirate crews, but against any normal nation-state, or even lesser New World factions, my clones are unstoppable. In fact, I once lent these units to a kingdom's army and helped crush a revolutionary uprising before it could spread. They called it decisive. I call it good science." He folded his arms, surveying Nethan as though sizing him up. "So, Captain Morgan, now that you know what I have at my disposal, what will you do? Join me, or stand in my way?" Nethan's jaw tightened. He met Gage's stare without flinching, already weighing the odds. In that instant, the true scale of Gage's ambition and the threat it posed to the entire sea became chillingly clear. Nethan regarded him coolly. "You know the world government has already set its sights on you, and make no mistake, they'd do anything to get their hands on your research. Compared to Gaji, their resources dwarf every other power. If they acquire your cloning methods, they could churn out legions of soldiers, even clones with Ijinji-level abilities. Regular troops are one thing, but an army full of fighters like Iji Niji? That would be a nightmare." Gaji's shoulders slumped, and his voice grew heavy. "That's exactly my fear. The government wants everything I've spent my life perfecting, but they'll never let me rule the North Blue, so I refuse to hand it over. I have no ambition to conquer the world. My goal is simple: make Germa the supreme power of the North Blue. If the world government would agree to let me govern that sea, I'd willingly surrender my blood factor and cloning technologies, but they won't. The Gorosei would never allow any force to dominate the North Blue." Nethan closed the ledger with a soft thud. "As things stand, there's no way to establish this transaction without outside support," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Anyone who aims to dominate the northern seas must choose between going it alone or forging alliances, and doing it solo is near impossible." Across the table, Gage leaned forward. "My recent contacts with the Ghost Hand pirates have shown me a third path," he replied. "With your backing, the pirates' resources, and my cloning technology, we could lock down control of the northern seas." Nethan lifted his teacup, paused, then took a deliberate sip. When he set the cup back down, his gaze was steady. "Let me be clear. he said. You want me to use my influence to intimidate rival powers and even give the world government pause, so that, backed by the Ghost Hand pirates, you can assert dominance here. Gage nodded. Exactly. In exchange, I'll place my forces under your command. Using cloned soldiers and advanced scientific methods, we can field an army within weeks. Troops programmed for absolute obedience and unflinching in battle. Whether it's protecting shipping lanes among the nations or pushing outward to conquer new territories, they'd execute your orders without question. He paused, his expression earnest. Of course, once we've secured our position, I'd expect greater autonomy for myself. But first, we seize the northern seas, together. Nethan lounged against the railing, watching Jia Shi and her sister Reiju with cool interest. I don't mind allying with the Ghost Hand pirates, he said lightly, but what I really want is a domain of my own. A feudal lordship, if you will. Your power isn't even necessary for me. This arrangement is completely one-sided. And, since you're all standing here, he added, voice dropping to a razor edge, I could kill you right now and claim your abilities for myself. Jiaji's expression darkened. If you kill us, my clone troopers will wipe our data and tech, then self-destruct. You'll end up imprisoned, used for experiments on our bloodline factor transformation process. I'm quite intrigued by that research. Nethan's lips curved in a faint smile. Why make things so messy? Before Jiaji could reply, Reiju stepped forward, her voice soft but unwavering. We'll give you exactly what you want, she said. In return, all we ask is your protection. Really? Nethan rose smoothly to his feet and strolled forward. He lifted a single finger, caught a strand of Reiju's hair, and tipped her chin up so their eyes met. What if? I want something more. A nervous cough echoed behind them. Robin, clearly uncomfortable. Nethan ignored it. Reiju returned his gaze with a serene smile. I can't make that decision. She paused, voice hushed. Father's approval is required. Nethan cocked his head in surprise as Gage's question hung in the air. Captain Nethan, you're not married yet? Gage blinked. Only now did he realize the youthful energy behind the titles. One of the 4 emperors and world's strongest hid the fact that Nethan was probably barely in his 20s. A spark of inspiration flickered in Gage's mind. Perhaps this was his opening. Turning to Nethan, he gathered his courage. If you're willing, I believe Reiju would be honored to stand by your side. Nethan offered him a half-smile. You're suggesting Reiju as my betrothed? Gage hesitated, glancing at Nethan's impassive face. He swallowed. Yes. Reiju, Niji, and Yuji are the crown jewels of our blood factor research, 4 perfect creations. Of course, giving one away leaves only 3, which is hard to bear. But if this alliance wins your support for the Germa Kingdom and secures your dominance over the North Sea, I think we'd all consider it a small sacrifice. Nethan studied him for a long moment. The offer was bold, politically and personally, but Gage's earnestness was undeniable. And the chance to expand his influence in the North Sea was tempting. Finally, Nethan inclined his head, eyes gleaming with strategy and something more. Very well, Gage, he said quietly. Let us speak of details. Chapter 345, Sanji's Whereabouts. When Judge spoke, almost no one noticed. Everyone was still lost in their own thoughts. Only Reiju sighed quietly. A faint smile lingered on her lips, but its edges trembled with sadness. She wasn't surprised by her father's decision. In fact, she'd already expected it. And yet, her mind kept drifting back to one person. Sanji. Where was he now? Was he even alive? Reiju's heart ached as she thought of him. She'd never felt any real warmth for the rest of her family. 3 brothers who treated compassion as a weakness, and a father who cared for nothing but power and politics. Better, perhaps, that her thoughts turned elsewhere. Next to her, Nethan lounged casually, as though the conversation had never weighed on him. He'd suggested their current course almost offhand, and both Reiju and Judge had gone along without protest. In truth, he'd always planned to bring Germa 66 into the fold. Otherwise, he'd never have allowed the Vinsmokes to set foot on this desolate island. Robin watched Nethan from the corner of her eye, but said nothing. No one understood him better than she did. Sometimes he'd break into the oddest flirtations for no reason at all, words that tumbled out before he'd even realized what he was saying. Robin had long since grown used to it. Silence fell again as each of them wondered the same thing. What had become of Sanji? What's more, Gage muttered under his breath. Equipping Nethin with a 30-shot grappling harpoon launcher is nothing short of a godsend for Germa 66. When Nethin nodded his approval, Gage's usually impassive expression cracked into a genuine smile. After all, with a figure like Nethin, one of the revered four emperors, feared and respected across the seas, there was no question he'd keep his promises. Effective immediately, Germa 66 becomes the 8th Division, Nethin declared in his calm, authoritative tone. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. You'll be the division's captain. Choose your adjutants, set your own regulations, run everything the way you see fit. I won't interfere. All I require is the authority to deploy the unit whenever necessary. For Gage, a hands-off approach to governance was ideal. He'd been eager for autonomy in training and leading his troops. Now he had exactly that. He wanted to raise his hand in enthusiastic agreement, but instead contented himself with a firm nod. Nethin glanced over at Reiju, who stood by quietly. Reiju will remain here as our liaison to Germa 66, he continued. She'll report back to me on all developments. With that, the framework was set. Nethin took no further role in daily operations. Gage assumed full command of the newly minted 8th Division, and Reiju bridged the gap between them. Germa 66 had never been stronger, or more independent. In addition, Reiju would now command the clone troops stationed in the Wan-Guo seas. Having decided to keep her close, Nethin refused to give her a meaningless desk job. Instead, she would serve as his intermediary between the Ghost Hand pirates and Germa 66. With Germa 66 committed to a long-term stay in the North Sea, only a small garrison of clones would remain behind in Wan-Guo, and Reiju would oversee both their military operations and the region's civil administration. Nethin trusted her judgment implicitly. Someone like Shiryu of the Rain excelled on the battlefield, but would be a poor choice for governance. Gage nodded in approval at the arrangement. Though Reiju's formal rank would fall short of the Ghost Hand Pirates' captains, she would still outrank most vice-captains and enjoy direct access to Nethin. This structure also quietly quashed any talk of Nethin lingering indefinitely in Beihai. He ignored Gage's approving look and turned his full attention to Reiju, waiting for her answer. Captain Gage caught Nethin's gaze shifting and turned to Reiju. What's your assessment, Reiju? Of course, it was purely rhetorical. She couldn't refuse his orders. He merely needed her to voice her agreement. Everything is proceeding smoothly, Reiju lied, her tone steady. It's my honor to serve as liaison officer and commander on this mission. Nethin studied her more closely. Her face remained impassive, yet he detected the faintest stir of pride in her mind. Over the past weeks, his mastery of knowledge and will had grown so potent that he could perceive the subtlest currents of emotion in others. Was this the legendary voice of all things? If so, he was still at its dawn, able only to catch fleeting impressions of anger, sorrow, or determination. Very well, Nethin said, stepping back. I won't detain you any longer. For the materials and support you require, liaise directly with Lafitte. I expect a clone battalion, sufficient to meet my specifications, to be deployed in the 10,000 kingdoms within 2 weeks. Gigi offered a confident nod and a faint smile. Science never errs. As long as we have the resources, we can turn out flawless troops at will, Gage declared. He bowed carefully to Nethin, then leaned in to speak quietly to Reiju. She was to stay at Nethin's side, observe everything here, obey his lead, and report back to Gage at once. Before Reiju could answer, Gage turned on his heel and led Nethin and Robin out of the palace. Reiju remained seated, cradling a delicate teacup and sipping her tea as though she hadn't heard Gage's instructions, or simply refused to acknowledge them. Robin caught her staring blankly into her cup and shook her head in sympathy. Having pieced together Germa's secrets, Robin understood exactly who Reiju was, where she came from, and just how cold-hearted Gage could be. Reiju had become nothing more than a strategic asset. Who wouldn't feel hollow in her place? Nethin walked back toward Reiju, his brow creased with concern. He paused beside her, and lowering his voice asked, "Do you want to know about Sanji?" Reiju froze, her teacup trembling in her hand. At his words, she lifted her head and stared at Nethin, curiosity and something deeper flickering in her eyes. Nethin stood and offered her a gentle smile. "Come with me. I'll explain everything." Without waiting for Reiju to answer, he turned on his heel and strode out of the hall. Reiju's eyes widened in surprise and suspicion, but curiosity won out. She hurried after him, slipping through the palace doors into the courtyard beyond. Robin lingered in the shadows, her brow furrowing. Sanji, the Vinsmoke's third child, who was supposed to have died in the war? Every word of Nethin's quiet conversation had carried clearly, and he hadn't bothered to lower his voice. In all the records she had gathered on Germa, Sanji's name appeared only once, a brief note that he perished young amid battle. Most would dismiss it, but Robin's memory was too keen to let such a detail pass unnoticed. Moreover, the hesitation in Nethin's tone suggested that Sanji might not be dead after all. Could there be a hidden chapter to that tragic story? Robin's surprise deepened as she wondered where Nethin had uncovered this revelation. It had always been like this. Nethin seemed to know things that no one else did, as if secrets unfolded around him. Robin Helmsley oversaw every scrap of intelligence the Ghost Hand pirates collected. Every report, every whisper of information passed through her hands. She took pride in her role. After all, she was the crew's lone conduit to all their secrets, and the only one Nethin trusted for reliable updates. Yet recently, she'd begun to notice a troubling pattern. How did Nethin keep uncovering details that hadn't even reached her wide-ranging network? The more time she spent with him, the more she felt he was concealing something vital. But unless he chose to confide in her, she had no choice but to keep her questions to herself. It was her duty to piece together what she could, and to do it well. Chapter 346, Potential. A pale light filtered through the clouds as Nethin emerged onto the highest terrace of Bika Sky Island's Cloud Palace. From this lofty perch, the entire island lay stretched out beneath him, an endless sea of cotton-white clouds drifting under a boundless blue sky. Reiju climbed the spiraling corridor just behind him, her breath catching at the sight. When Nethin had first uttered the name Sanji, something in her heart had stirred, a fragile hope she'd guarded in silence. For months she'd scoured every report, every rumor, only to find empty leads. Yet here, at last, was proof that Sanji lived. She didn't hesitate to trust Nethin. His status as an envoy of the Sky Island and his uncanny knowledge of Sanji's name spoke volumes. How he came by the information remained a mystery, but Reiju had long ago learned to rely on his word. Nethin stood with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the rolling clouds far below. Dawn's first rays cast a golden glow over the palace spires, and in that light he seemed almost serene. Somewhere beyond the horizon, Sanji endured, and if no unforeseen fate befall him, Reiju and Sanji would one day stand reunited. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of wind through the palace's open arches. Then Nethin spoke, his voice steady. "It won't be long now." Reiju let herself smile for the first time in months. Hope, she realized, was a powerful force, even stronger perhaps, than any weapon the Sky Islands possessed. And as the sun climbed higher, warming the cloud-choked heights, she felt certain their paths would cross again. If nothing changes, Sanji will still join the Straw Hat Pirates. They'll sweep through the Grand Line, fight in the Paramount War, and eventually reach the New World. But I'm afraid Luffy's dream may never come true, because Nethin will not allow the One Piece to exist in this world. Nethin is one of the 4 emperors. For Luffy to claim the title of Pirate King, he'd have to surpass Nethin, and that's simply impossible. Now that Nethin has already overthrown the world government and brought the entire world to heel, he certainly has no intention of letting another Pirate King rise. Unless Luffy somehow snuck away to Raftu before Nethin's coup and discovered the One Piece in secret, slipping it past Nethin's notice. Could it really happen? Reiju whispered, her eyes shining with yearning. Nethin's words had already planted a seed of hope in her mind. Nethin's gaze drifted to the horizon, where a shaft of golden sunlight pierced the clouds. Then he looked back at Reiju, studying her expression intently. A spark of curiosity ignited within him. Silently, he activated a subtle, almost forbidden scan, an advanced bloodline factor analysis born from the darkest edges of scientific research, to examine her very genetics. There was something about Reiju that intrigued him far more than any pirate's treasure. Reiju noticed Nethin's steady gaze and turned to meet his eyes. Rather than looking away, she tilted her head and offered a soft smile. What are you searching for, Lord Nethan? I'm a bit curious about this blood factor you've mentioned. Nethan made no attempt to hide his interest. He propped his chin on one hand and looked at her thoughtfully. I'd like to understand it better, he admitted. Reiju shook her head lightly. I'm afraid I don't know much. Father never shared the specifics. When it comes to the core technology behind the bloodline factor, Jiaji holds all the cards. Even my sisters and I haven't been given the full details. There's no point in explaining it to us. He isn't training scientists. He's molding powerful warriors who follow orders without question. Nethan rubbed his chin, accepting her answer without a hint of doubt. After studying her face a few moments longer, he nodded and beckoned her forward with a casual wave. Reiju stepped toward him with unwavering composure, her gentle smile never faltering. When she stood beside him, Nethan reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. Leaning in slightly, he pressed his fingers against her skin. With just a little pressure, he could feel the unusual density of her bones, confirmation that she was no ordinary fighter. Lineage factor modification. This wasn't the usual mechanized transformation, but a true rewriting of his genes, fundamental, permanent enhancement. Nethan could still feel the faint ache in his arm where it had been altered, but he made no move to pull away. Reiju watched him curiously as he released her wrist and let his fingertips trail lightly over her skin before lifting his hand to inspect it. A glistening residue clung to his fingers. Poison? Nethan's brow furrowed. He knew all too well that Reiju's powers were venomous. She only shrugged and replied in an innocent tone, "Just a reflex, sorry about that. Want me to detoxify you?" "Not necessary." Nethan shook his head. With only a thought, he channeled a coil of twisting power through his arm. The mucus vanished instantly, as if dissolved by heat. He flexed his fingers, no numbness, no sting. Reiju's poison had no purchase on his new physiology. Nethan allowed himself a faint half-smile. He wasn't far behind Kaido in raw resilience anymore. Even Magellan's deadliest toxins would at best slow him for a heartbeat. He looked back at Reiju. "Am I really worthy of claiming a seat among the four emperors?" His tone was teasing, but his eyes were ice-cold and entirely serious. Ryu watched Nethan's fingers intently, her eyes flickering as she realized her poison hadn't slowed him in the slightest. She hadn't even used her full strength. This was just a reflexive test, but if he could shrug that off, then even a full activation of her ability might have no effect. "Your physiology is fascinating," Reiju said softly. Nethan offered a faint smile. He understood the basics of her power, but to learn more, he'd have to study her deeper, just as she would with him. Reiju returned his smile, intrigued. Rubbing his chin, Nethan paused before speaking. Bloodline traits can grant superhuman abilities from birth, but they also lock you into a fixed potential. It's a double-edged sword. Reiju looked at him, puzzled. In truth, Nethan continued evenly, everyone's raw potential is equal. Those born with extraordinary physiques simply start life with more of it already unlocked. Admirals like Carp in the Navy, or legends like Whitebeard among the pirates, have nearly exhausted their own limits. They're powerful, yes, but they've also maxed out what they can ever become. Nethan watched Reiju thoughtfully. "The way you're using the bloodline factor," he began, "does give you incredible power from birth, but it also locks you into human limits. You'll never surpass legends like Garp or Whitebeard." Reiju paused, her gaze drifting upward. "I understand," she said finally. "This bloodline augmentation trades our future potential for immediate strength. An unmodified person might never fully unlock their own capabilities, but once you've altered your blood, you fix both your path and your ceiling. Since I turned 16, I've barely grown stronger at all." Nethan smiled at her concern. "Doesn't that discourage you?" She returned his smile calmly. "Heroes like Garp and Whitebeard appear only once in a generation. Even without the bloodline factor, I'd still be stronger than most. Not everyone dreams of being the world's strongest. Many don't even consider it. If you never allow yourself to believe you can be the best, then you've already denied your own potential." Nethan shook his head. "It's hard to say for sure. Without that bloodline transformation, Reiju might be no stronger than Sanji, still slaving away as the chef at the Shanghai restaurant. Then again, she could keep shattering her own limits and suddenly leap ahead in power. Right now, though, she's definitely weaker than Lafitte, Robin, and the others, and only marginally stronger than the various vice captains. Chapter 347. Fire Fist Ace at Maryjoyce. The very heart of the world government, an urgent communique rippled through the grand throne room. Germa 66 had made covert contact with the Ghost Hand pirates. The name whispered alongside this revelation, Wensi Makji, sent a chill through every minister in attendance. Was this enigmatic figure plotting to swear allegiance to one of the four emperors? Germa's scientists had expected the world government to clamor for their advanced weaponry and cloning techniques. Instead, officials responded with surprising indifference. Why? Because Dr. Vegapunk, the government's resident genius, had already dissected and replicated every Germa invention, then pushed the technology even farther. The first-generation pacifista units alone had demonstrated terrifying power. Now, Vegapunk was developing their second generation, rumored to incorporate Admiral Kizaru's laser abilities directly into the cyborg framework. In comparison, Germa's cloning breakthroughs seemed almost quaint. Yet despite their casual attitude, the world government was determined that no rival, especially the ruthless Ghost Hand pirates, could ever seize Germa's secrets. In today's new age of pirates, the Ghost Hand threatened the seas more than any other force. If they succeeded in harnessing Germa 66's technology, the balance of power would shift irrevocably, and the world government would face its most perilous challenge yet. Although the Ghost Hand pirates still lack the strength to face the world government in open battle, they have already grown virtually untouchable. Their quiet conquest of Wano has left the world government's five elders, Wu Laoxing and his colleagues, uneasy in a way no other pirate crew has managed. Where the other Yonko flaunt their power, Nethin's approach feels oddly legitimate. He isn't content to pillage and vanish. He's building a true regime. It's not just another pirate operation, Wu Laoxing growled as the council gathered deep within the Grand Line Administration Hall. Nethin wants a kingdom, one he can pass on, and he's doing it with technology none of us have ever faced. The Ghost Hand pirates had somehow acquired the means to clone human beings, creating shock troops whose loyalty could not be questioned. In ordinary hands, cloning might have been dismissed as mere science, but in Nethin's, it was a weapon capable of sharpening the fangs of his emerging state. The moment Nethin unleashes those clones against us, we'll be defenseless, admitted Elder Cheng, his voice low. We must find a way to intercept or destroy this technology before he can mass-produce it. But how? Elder Cao asked. We can't seize it from Nethin directly, and the world government's forces are too stretched to risk an all-out assault on Wano. Elder Feng, who overseen intelligence gathering, tapped a finger on the holomap of the 10,000-nation sea area. There is one option left, Germa. If we can lure them away from Wano, perhaps provoke them into action elsewhere, we might strike at their research facilities first. It's reckless, but it's our best shot. The council fell silent. Agreeing to manipulate Germa amounted to a full gambit. If it failed, it would hand the Ghost Hand pirates the high ground. Finally, Wu Laoxing nodded. Do it. Prepare the provocations. If Germa redeploys, we'll follow, and we'll hit their labs before Nethin knows what's coming. With the plan set, the five elders dispersed to their commands. Half a month passed in a blur of covert operations and diplomatic ruses. Soon, the stage would be set, and the true conflict between the world government, Germa, and the rising Ghost Hand regime would begin. Over the past fortnight, the Navy launched a full-scale assault on Germa 66, only to be driven back by Lafitte and Shilyu of the Rain. At the same time, the world government publicly declared that Germa 66 had colluded with pirates and revoked its status as a sanctioned nation. Judge Vinsmoke wasn't the least bit surprised. He'd long ago anticipated this move and laid his plans accordingly. With the government's announcement, Germa 66 was officially branded part of the Ghost Hand pirates. Before long, they were recognized everywhere as the 8th fleet of that notorious alliance. Yet instead of inviting attacks, Germa's new outlaw status only deepened the world's fear. No one dared challenge them. After all, the memory was still fresh. Not long ago, the Ghost Hand pirates had routed the Whitebeard pirates. And in that same sweep of legend, Nethin had risen to claim the title of the world's strongest pirate. Together, he and the Ghost Hand pirates had become the most terrifying force on the seas. Most people don't fear the world government. After all, as long as you keep your nose clean and don't cross Emperor Wu Laoxing himself, a few minor infractions will simply be ignored. Corruption runs deep in every branch, so petty crimes rarely make it onto anyone's radar. Pirates, however, play by a different set of rules. They answer to no one. Offend them, and they'll come knocking on your door at dawn. A fortnight later, a contingent of clone soldiers under Reiju's command appeared in the Sea of Nations. Reiju already oversaw 3 medium-sized islands and half a dozen smaller isles, and alongside the reinforcements added by the 7 fan teams, they finally had enough manpower to hold their ground. Sky Island Bika, the palace's inner pavilion. "Have you transferred the devil fruits to Wooden yet?" Robin asked, peering across the low table. Nathan wiped juice from his fingers as he peeled another segment of fruit. "All done," he replied, his tone casual. "They're secure." Wooden, the giant who distinguished himself in the battle against the Whitebeard pirates, was already waiting below, ready to guard the spoils. As one of the elite among his kind, he'd earned every bit of his reputation. Nathan tossed a rind onto the plate, leaned back, and listened to Robin's report on the latest troop movements. The calm before the next storm was a rare luxury these days, and they intended to make the most of it. Although Wooden still lagged far behind titans like the sand giant Rhodes, he towered over most of his peers. He'd joined Nathan earlier than any of the vice captains or the rank-and-file teams, and he'd proven himself in battle. By both merit and seniority, everyone agreed it was only right that the coveted transfer fruit should go to him. With this latest promotion, the giant corps had gained one more formidable cadre. Robin gave a small nod. She knew better than anyone how potent a transfer fruit could be. Ever since Wooden had consumed it, his strength had shot up dramatically, almost as if it had magnified his natural gifts. The only thing he still lacked was mastery of the 2-color hockey, but he trained tirelessly. In another year and a half, he might begin to rival even Rhodes on that front, though their powers were simply on different leagues. "Any news of the Soul fruit?" Nathan popped a Sky Island specialty fruit into his mouth, its sweetness lingering as he spoke. Robin shook her head. "Nothing yet, but there's word of a rookie pirate who just declined the world government's Shichibukai offer." Nathan raised an eyebrow. "Oh," he chewed thoughtfully. A new wild card in the seas could mean trouble or opportunity. Either way, their world had just gotten a little more interesting. Nathan lounged in his private study, barely glancing at the latest Shichibukai dossiers spread across his desk. Lately, he'd grown bored of their petty squabbles, except of course for one name, Dracul Hawkeye Mayhawk, the world's greatest swordsman. But today, it wasn't Hawkeye who drew his attention. It was a rumor that a new devil fruit user had appeared on the high seas, someone significant enough to trigger both the Navy's Devil Fruit Research Division and the Shichibukai Command. Robin slipped through the door soundlessly, a single parchment clutched in her hand. Without preamble, she laid it on the coffee table before him. Nathan raised an eyebrow as she spoke. "This newcomer already has a bounty of 4 dread million berries. His name, Fire Fist Ace." Nathan's smirk widened. Fire Fist Ace. Of course. It was the 19th year of the Great Pirate Era, and Ace had set sail only this year. In mere months, he'd carved out a reputation so fierce that even the Shichibukai had tried to recruit him and been flatly refused. Now he was tearing through the Grand Line, heading straight for the New World. "All right, Robin," Nathan said, leaning back. "Keep me posted on everything. His movements, his crew, any allies he picks up. A devil fruit user of that caliber changes the balance of power. I want to know his next move before anyone else does." Robin nodded and slipped away. Nathan watched the parchment flutter on the table, already imagining the ripples Ace's arrival would send through the seas, and how he might exploit them to his own advantage. Nathan felt the sting of defeat alongside Whitebeard, and in that moment abandoned any lingering dream of claiming the One Piece for himself. He swore his allegiance to Whitebeard's crew and set his sights on their new path. A few days later, he leaned over the latest wanted poster, concentrating on a familiar face. "Where is he now?" Nathan asked casually. Robin looked up from her readings and tapped the parchment with a slender finger. Last I heard, he sailed for Fishman Island. He caused no trouble there, so word is he'll be heading into the New World soon. Nethan nodded, folding his arms. Keep a close watch, he said thoughtfully. With the Big Mom pirates crushed by our own hand, Firefist Ace's story may be about to shift in ways none of us can predict. Strength alone doesn't make him a threat. He's still a rookie, but his heritage is extraordinary. He's the son of the late pirate king Goldie Roger, the grandson of Admiral Garp, and even the red-haired Shanks keeps tabs on him. Don't underestimate what he might become. Robin met his gaze and offered a wry smile. Understood. Chapter 48, Ace vs. Lafitte, New World, somewhere off the coast of the Red Earth continent. The ocean's surface suddenly roiled, and a massive bubble of water exploded upward, enveloping a lone ship as it rose. When the hull finally broke free of the waves, the shimmering sphere burst with a resounding pop. Back on the surface at last. On deck, a young man in a thick fur hat stretched luxuriously. He adjusted the brim of his cap with a single finger, flames dancing across his knuckles, announcing his true nature, a devil fruit user of the burning fruit. Fire Fist Ace. Boss Ace, where to next? One of his crewmates called, breathing in the bracing sea breeze of the New World. Ace's gaze swept the horizon. A faint glow flickered in his eyes before a deep smile spread across his face. First, I'm going to find the red-haired, he said, voice low with determination. After that, we'll see where the winds take us. 2 months later, at an altitude of roughly 12,000 meters. Nethan pressed himself against the crushing force of simulated gravity, every muscle screaming in protest. He leapt and landed again, tapping the air beneath his feet in a relentless drill known as the monthly step. Sweat streamed down his face as he fought against the weight bearing down on his body, each repetition forging him stronger, faster, more resilient. Day after day, he repeated the motion, footfall, flight, footfall, pushing beyond his limits until skywalking itself felt like second nature. Because the talent system's enhancements are merely bonuses, Nethan still needs to strengthen his natural physique, and fast. Without that core improvement, no amount of talent points would let him fully channel the inversion fruit's power. His body simply couldn't withstand the strain. Now that his gravity distortion ability is fully activated, it may not yet rival Admiral Fujitora's, but it's terrifying enough. The pressure under this warped gravity alone would crush any ordinary person, and they're 12 kilometers above sea level, where the air is thin and every breath is a struggle. Any CP9 operative dropped into these conditions would collapse under the weight, unable to stand, let alone perform the precise footwork required for a moonstep. Yet there he is, practicing step after step, sweat soaking his tunic. Boo 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 boo, he murmurs in rhythm, feet striking the invisible stage he's created. Suddenly his den mushi chirps urgently. Nethan pauses, then plants his foot and drives it downward with explosive force. The impact rips through the air like a thunderclap, sending a visible ripple coursing through the void. At that very instant, everything changes. Nethan cut off his personal gravity field and hovered effortlessly in midair. Fishing a slim combug from his belt, he tapped it once. "What's the situation?" he rumbled. Daily high-altitude training left no room for idle chatter. "Fire Fist Ace has appeared." Robin's voice crackled through the earpiece, just 4 urgent words. Nethan paused for a heartbeat, rubbed the back of his neck with a soft click, then ended the call. In one fluid motion, he flipped his trajectory and drove his foot downward. The crack of a sonic boom trailed in his wake as he rocketed towards Sky Island Bika, covering 2,000 meters in the blink of an eye. Seconds before impact, he inverted his gravity field beneath his boot, cushioning the descent. The living cloud courtyard beneath him quivered, concentric ripples spreading out like a pebble dropped in a still pond. Stepping forward, Nethan moved through the expanse of cloud-paved stone and pressed on toward the palace gates looming ahead. Nethan stepped out of the bathroom just as Robin entered, carrying a fresh set of clothes. He peeled off his sweat-soaked shirt, rinsed it quickly, and handed it back. Robin smiled faintly and offered him the dry garments. "Did you rough up our men?" Nethan asked, pulling on the shirt. Robin tilted his head. "It looks like he meant to challenge you. Fire Fist isn't weak. Ordinary fighters don't stand a chance against him. Lafitte already learned that the hard way." Nithin buttoned the top button and regarded Robin calmly. Lafitte might not beat him, he said. Neither will I know for certain if I win or lose, until I try. Robin passed him a black cloak and draped it over Nithin's shoulders. Shiryu of the Rain is planning to go with us. Nithin shook his head. No, I'll go alone. We don't need him. Understood. Robin tapped the small transmitter clipped to Nithin's collar. A moment later, his lips moved in a silent dispatch. Far away, in a dimly lit room, Shiryu of the Rain finished wiping down his blade. When he heard Nithin's voice over the bug confirming he'd be going in person, he sighed, set the knife aside, and shook his head. At long last, someone had dared to land a few solid blows, someone who even lunged to seize my head. But in the end, it was hopeless. Who, or what, had made me boss of it all? Rumor had it some obscure faction of the IWC had pulled the strings behind my rise. Now, on a mid-sized island once known as Biscuit Town, the true face of the boss was on display. In the town's broad main street, a figure wreathed in roaring flames squared off against the impeccably dressed Lafitte, the Ghost Hand Pirate's devil sheriff. 2 words summed up the burning man before him: Boss Nithin. Behind me, my crew stood in a solemn line, each member as stern as the next. My trademark hat, its brim curled just so, was enshrouded in crimson fire, flickering with every heartbeat. I let my grin spread. Before I settle things with your boss, I called to Lafitte, I'll loosen up with you first. Ho ho ho, look at you, all wide-eyed and green. Lafitte merely tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Many have tried to challenge our boss, he said evenly, but most never even glimpse him. Ever since the Ghost Hand Pirates rose to 4 Emperor status, only the boldest supernovas from the New World, those who've conquered the Grand Line's first half, dare to step up, and even they rarely pass our vice captains. None have ever laid a finger on the boss, much less dared to challenge him. I let out a low chuckle, the fire around me dancing in response. Then let them try, I said. And with that, the street fell silent, everyone waiting to see who would be the next to test fate against the captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates. Since Ace's reputation as the strongest supernova in years is uncontested, no other up-and-coming pirate even comes close to matching him. Add in the fearsome power of his devil fruit, and it's no wonder Lafitte chose to face him personally instead of delegating to one of his lieutenants. Ace cracked a confident smile. There's always someone out there who can shatter every legend, he declared. Fire Fist. In an instant, his right fist ignited, blazing with white-hot flames as he drove it forward. A wave of fire roared down the street, threatening to incinerate everything in its path. True to his Logia nature, Lafitte didn't hesitate. He narrowed his eyes, leapt onto a nearby rooftop, and let Ace's inferno sweep harmlessly beneath him. The moment he landed, he drew his pistol and fired 3 precise shots. Bang! 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 Each bullet streaked toward Ace with ruthless force. Yet for a Logia user like Ace, untouchable in the thick of battle, such attacks were often little more than a nuisance. He merely smirked, readying himself for the next move. In this new world, Nithin had already felt the surge of domineering power. He knew his opponents here were nothing like those he'd faced on the old trail. A silver bullet whistled past. Instinctively, he dove aside. Still, Lafitte's shot came at a wicked angle, grazing Nithin's shoulder, tearing his jacket and scoring a shallow scar across his skin. Back in the first half of his journey, that surprise might have rattled him, but now he only narrowed his eyes. Raising his hand in a pistol shape, he whispered, "Musket." In an instant, twin jets of flame blazed from his fingertips, searing toward Lafitte. The man in the mahogany cloak shift, Ted with uncanny grace, his slender frame twisting like a slip of paper as he sidestepped the inferno. His cane, polished dark wood, cut an arc through the air, deflecting the heat. Nithin allowed himself a faint, knowing smile. His eyes gleamed. "Is that all your domineering power can do?" he taunted, already ready for Lafitte's next move. Ace was brash, much like Luffy and the others, but in the heat of battle, whether by talent or sheer instinct, he had an uncanny eye for detail. Just as he finished calling out his technique, a strange flicker of flame traced across the air toward Lafitte. In an instant, it blossomed into a raging inferno. Lafitte's eyes widened. With lightning reflexes, he sprang back, tore off his burning cloak, and flung it to the pavement below. "You sensed that coming? Rookie mistake?" Ace taunted with a grin. He swung both arms outward, and two searing arcs of fire sliced horizontally through the street like twin blades, hurtling straight for Lafitte. Lafitte's eyes narrowed as he tumbled back under the roar of Ace's flames. He had no grand, sweeping attack that could rival such incendiary power, nor did he want to risk a close-quarters slugfest with the Fire Fist. At a distance, though, Ace's Devil Fruit ability gave him a decisive edge. Not far off, Ace's crew stood enthralled. The so-called Four Emperors, renowned across the seas, looked anything but daunting when forced into retreat by their captain. Many still recalled how Ace had once feasted alongside Shanks and his red-haired pirates. If no one feared the Emperor then, why fear the Emperor now? Grins spread through the onlookers as they watched Lafitte backpedal under Ace's unrelenting assault. Yet Lafitte himself remained unshaken. His constant evasion was no admission of weakness or an inferior position, it was simply prudent. Then, spotting an opening, he suddenly surged forward. In a blink, his fist blackened and stiffened as he coated it with hockey, hurtling a crushing counterstrike straight at Ace. Nithin didn't hesitate. He hefted a blazing fist and slammed it toward Lafitte. Boom! Seething magma roared across the field like an angry beast. Lafitte scrambled backward, unwilling to let his clothes or himself be consumed by those molten waves. Nithin stayed in his fighting stance, magma crackling around his arm. With a low, feral shout, he swept that fiery fist again, forcing Lafitte to retreat even farther. In their world of devil fruit abilities, armament hockey can range from barely noticeable to downright overwhelming. Lafitte's hockey was solid but not exceptional. His strength lay in strategy, information, and guile rather than sheer power. Confronted by Nithin's magma devil fruit, which sapped almost no endurance from its user, Lafitte knew he couldn't match blow for blow. His only chance was to outthink Nithin, exploiting any opening he could find, or hope the relentless magma onslaught eventually wore his opponent down. Though with Paramecia users like Nithin, stamina was rarely an issue. Shaking his head, Lafitte braced himself. He'd have to rely on speed, trickery, and every ounce of cunning he possessed if he wanted to survive this scorching onslaught. After forcing Lafitte back, Ace didn't press his attack. He stopped dead in the clearing, flames still dancing across his arms, and fixed Lafitte with a cool stare. "What's the matter? All out of fight?" he asked, tilting his head. "If you can't handle me, you might as well call in your boss. I'd love to see where Nithin is right now." At the mention of Nethin's name, Lafitte's face went deathly pale. A dark, malevolent gleam replaced his earlier bravado. Insults and threats he could shrug off, but the idea that he'd need to summon Nithin? Preposterous. "Call Nithin." Lafitte snarled, teeth bared. "You really think I'd run whining to my superior just because I'm outmatched?" His lips curved into a cruel, sinister smile as he prepared to charge. But before he could move, something in the sky caught his eye. He froze and slowly turned his gaze upward. High above the island, a huge black shape tore through the clouds, hurtling down like a meteor. Ace glanced up too. A flicker of surprise flashed in his fiery eyes as he watched that dark silhouette plummet toward them. "What the?" Ace's voice cut off as he and his crew instinctively glanced skyward. There, against the fading daylight, a dark shape plummeted toward the town. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The shadow hurtled closer. Then, just as it was about to pass over the rooftops, it vanished in a single inky flash. "Where did it go?" Ace frowned, staring at the empty sky. Around him, his men exchanged bewildered looks. None had seen how the shadow simply erased itself. Shaking off the confusion, they redirected their gazes toward Lafitte. Instantly, every face went pale. Beside the smirking rogue stood a new figure, so silent and sudden that no one had noticed his arrival. Ace's eyes narrowed. Who was this stranger, and how had he made that shadow disappear? A loaded silence settled over the group. Lafitte, brushing off the remnants of his earlier cruelty, stepped forward and bowed deeply. "Master Nithin," he intoned with forced courtesy, "I never imagined you'd deign to visit us in person." A murmur rippled through the crew. "Rhodes, Ghost Hand Nithin," someone breathed, awe and dread mingling in their tone as they recognized the legendary swordsman at their midst. Just one name was enough to send a thrill through Ace's crew. Nithin, the world's strongest man and captain of the Ghost Hand Pirates. They'd all stared at his wanted poster. Yet none had expected the most dangerous figure on the seas to look so ordinary. He wore nothing more glamorous than simple wooden clogs and cut-off shorts. His shirt hung unbuttoned, revealing a lean, scarred chest. A scruffy beard framed a face that might have belonged to any second-rate deckhand. In contrast to the flamboyant, red-haired buccaneers across the table, Nithin appeared downright unassuming. If not for that wanted plaque, no one would guess his true might. Ace leaned forward, a slow smile playing on his lips. "So you're the infamous Ghost Hand," he said, voice light. "Word is, you've never suffered a single defeat since you first set sail. The world government even offered you a Shichibukai title, and you just turned them down?" Nithin tipped his head back and scratched at his beard, as if to emphasize how little he cared for formalities. Then he shrugged. "Titles mean nothing," he replied, tone casual. "I have one goal, to prove I'm the strongest man on these seas." His calm gaze swept the banquet hall. "And that starts right here tonight." Nethin's heart pounded as Ace finally closed the distance between them. It almost felt as if Nethin himself had appeared before Ace, incredible and surreal. "Looking for me?" Ace's voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable challenge. "Here I am." Nithin turned slowly to face him. For a fraction of a second, their eyes locked, and in that instant, memories flooded Ace's mind. His mother's gentle smile, the towering figure of the pirate King Roger, and the unanswered questions that still drove him forward. His chest tightened with renewed determination. "Then let's settle this," Ace said, his voice low and fierce. "It's a duel." At that declaration, murmurs rippled through Ace's crew. Ace had never lost a comrade in battle. Only moments ago, he had effortlessly subdued Captain Lafitte of the Ghost Hand Pirates, a senior officer feared throughout the New World. If Ace could defeat someone as formidable as Lafitte, could he now stand toe-to-toe with Nethin? The rookies among them, still untested in these uncharted seas, exchanged odd glances. Their captain's reputation was legendary, and if he emerged victorious against Nethin, this quiet, unassuming figure whose name still carried rumors of greatness, they would have witnessed a legend in the making. Ace's eyes burned with challenge. Nithin met that gaze without flinching. The two men fell silent, the tension between them crackling in the humid air. All eyes were on them now. Whatever came next would decide who truly stood at the pinnacle of this sea. Nithin watched Ace with a calm, almost amused expression. "You're underestimating just how vast the New World really is," he said, folding his arms behind his back. "So far, you've only seen the barest tip of the iceberg. It's far too soon to think you can compete with me." Ace bristled, but didn't back down. Nethin continued, voice steady and measured. "For most pirates, the early stages of growth are deceptively swift, but once you enter the New World, progress grinds to a crawl. The stronger you become, the harder it is to climb any further. You might reach Rear Admiral rank in just a few years, but getting to Lieutenant General? That could take over a decade. And if you dream of wielding power on the level of a full general, you might not see it happen in your lifetime." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Even someone of my talent needed 6 years to claim a spot among the Yonko," he added quietly. "What, you expect to take that throne in a single year? Is that what you call haste?" Ace snapped. "You think you're so much better than me." Though his anger burned bright, he wore no sign of deference, only the same brash confidence Luffy once showed. Nethin lifted his chin and cast a casual glance at Ace's crew lined up behind him. "Tell me, do you really believe any of you, could ever earn the title of Yonko?" His tone was light, but the challenge in his eyes was unmistakable. The crew members, caught in Nethin's stare, felt their hearts pound and cold sweat break out on their brows. Across the deck, Ace realized with a start that his men were being crushed beneath Nethin's invisible aura. His jaw tightened as Nethin's calm voice carried over the wind. "No one is born a Yonko. Titles don't matter, only victory does." At those words, fire erupted across Nethin's body, coiling and twisting until it took the shape of a colossal, blazing man. The very air around him shimmered with heat. "Leave this to me, Lord Nethin!" Lafitte shouted, stepping forward with drawn sword. Nethin held up a hand. "Stand down!" Lafitte bowed his head in obedience, falling back to let his captain claim the fight. Chapter 350, Ordinary Fist ZZ. Flames roared around Ace as he unleashed his power. Across the street, Nethan stood perfectly still, no deception in his posture, no quiver in his expression, just the calm of someone enjoying a seaside breeze. Ace's fighting spirit soared, his aura swelling until it reached its peak. Then, with a battle cry, he launched his signature move, the fire punch. In an instant, a torrent of roaring flames swept down the street, devouring everything in its path. The heat was suffocating, the light blinding. Spectators scrambled for cover as the inferno thundered forward. But Nethan didn't flinch. He raised his open, pale palm and gave it one effortless wave. Like a gust of wind dispersing dry leaves, the monstrous blaze collapsed inward, extinguishing itself before it could harm him. Not a single ember survived. For a long, stunned moment, the crowd was silent. Ace's most devastating attack, reduced to nothing more than smoke and ash with a flick of Nethan's hand. Whispers rippled through the onlookers. He shrugged off Ace's fire punch. Impossible. Ace has never faced an opponent this strong. Even the skeptical felt their hearts lurch. They had known Nethan was formidable, but to dismiss Ace's fiercest move so casually, that was beyond their wildest expectations. And for Ace, it was a shock he hadn't seen coming. If someone could be felled so easily, he couldn't be one of the four emperors. Ace didn't falter for a second. Learning just how formidable Nethan truly was only intensified his resolve. He had to win, no matter what. Flame ring! Ace roared as he vaulted into the air, arms slicing through the haze. A gargantuan swirl of fire erupted at his command, twisting skyward into a towering column of flame before crashing down with earth-shaking force. The inferno exploded outward in all directions. Nethan stood at its heart, the roaring blaze closing in on him. Lafitte, stationed just a short distance away, wisely backed off to avoid the scorching fallout. Ace's crew, too, scrambled back, leaning in with excitement, convinced their commander's attack was finally breaking through. It's working, Ace thought, eyes gleaming. But before anyone could celebrate, a quiet, emotionless voice cut through the roar. Is that all you've got? From the dying embers of the inferno, Nethan stepped forward, utterly unscathed. The flames dispersed as if they'd never existed, leaving not a single burn mark on his clothes or skin. Ace's triumphant grin froze. His heartbeat thundered in his ears as dread settled into his chest. He took a slow, trembling breath and realized just how deep a fight he was in. Nethan's strength had even exceeded his own expectations. Along the way, he'd faced one formidable opponent after another, even the Navy's lieutenant general, but he'd overcome them all. And this was only the beginning. Ace drew in a low, resonant breath and unleashed his power. Flames surged up his arms, coalescing into a blazing spear that he hurled straight at Nethan. "Shenko! Shiranui!" he roared. Before the first spear could land, Ace leapt back into the air, his entire body wreathed in fire, and sent another scorching javelin hurtling forward. Then another, and another. Boom, boom, boom. Each impact rocked the arena like a thunderous artillery blast, sending walls of flame roaring across the ground. The monstrous force of his attack drove every onlooker to retreat, shields raised instinctively against the searing heat. "Lord Ace!" his crew cried, pressing their hands to their cheeks as sweat and ash rained over them. Ace himself darted back and forth across the battlefield, firing flaming spears in a relentless machine gun rhythm. But Nethan did not flinch. The inferno may have tested his limits, but it only steeled his determination. As the last ember of Ace's fiery barrage faded, Nethan stood his ground, ready for whatever came next. Nethan hovered in midair, arms still glowing from the last of his flame spears. Ace pressed his palms together again, summoning another 20 blah, zing javelins, and then, without warning, a fist burst through the conflagration and drove straight into Ace's gut. Ace's flames vanished in an instant. He was sent hurtling backward like a broken puppet, crashing hard into a nearby building. Cracks spiderwebbed across the biscuit-white wall as the smoke cleared, and there stood Nethan, lowering his fist with cold precision. "Captain Ace?" someone on Ace's crew shouted, faces blanching with disbelief. Ace, who had traded blows evenly with Nethan earlier, had just been knocked flat by a single punch. No one could believe it. Ace coughed, blood flecking his lips. He forced himself up from the fractured wall, staggering but determined to fight on. Nethan's voice cut through the chaos, quiet and unhurried. "Not bad," he said, eyes never leaving Ace. "If you relied solely on your devil fruit, I'd expect your physical power to be average at best. But you just shrugged off my punch and got right back up. You're stronger than I thought. Ace's chest heaved. His every breath was a battle, but inside him blazed a stubborn refusal to yield. He stared at Nethin, defiance flickering in his eyes, just as he had the day he'd nearly bested Luffy in Marineford, and as Blackbeard had once warned would happen if Ace ever let his guard down. The tension hung thick in the air. Neither man spoke again, but both knew the real confrontation was only just beginning. "You're the strongest opponent I've faced so far," Ace panted, drawing in a steady breath. His eyes burned with resolve. "But I'll still win." He summoned his power. Mirror Flame. Suddenly, fire engulfed his body, flaring into towering, mirror-like walls of scorching heat that surged toward Nethin. Ace knew his usual long-range attacks barely scratched Nethin's defenses, so he used the blazing mirror flame as cover, charging headlong at him. In an instant, Nethin raised a single hand. With a swift motion, he shattered the monstrous firestorm into scattered embers. No sooner had the flames dissipated than Ace's fist, wreathed in lingering heat, slammed down toward him. Nethin blocked the blow with his forearm. Boom! The impact sent shockwaves rippling back into Ace, forcing the flame-clad punch to veer away harmlessly. Nethin arched an eyebrow as he surveyed Ace's gauntleted fist. He'd felt more than just residual fire. There was a subtle pulse of armament hockey woven into the attack. Had Ace triggered it instinctively? A self-awakening? Clearly, the line of fire between the brothers, Ace and Luffy, ran deep, bestowing talents that many envied. "Don't underestimate me," Ace roared, flames dancing furiously around his form. This time, a faint aura of armament hockey shimmered beneath the fire's glow. He launched a flurry of blazing strikes, each punch crackling with power as he pressed his assault on Nethin. Nethin strode forward with effortless calm, his eyes never leaving Ace as he tested his opponent's limits. Ace attacked in a frenzy, fists and elbows flying, but Nethin simply raised his arms and deflected every blow. Strike after strike, he met each one head-on, as if playing with a sparring partner far below his level. After repelling more than 20 consecutive attacks, Nethin's expression barely changed. He stepped in and threw a single, unadorned punch, no special technique, no hidden power, just the raw force of his fist. Boom! In an instant, the swirling flames overhead froze mid-dance. Ace's body locked up, then arched violently as the impact rippled through him like a crack in space. He shot backward like a spent projectile, tearing through 3 buildings in his path before crashing into a solid stone wall. The wall exploded in fragments. Ace's back slammed into the ruin, and he slumped to the ground, blood spurting from his mouth. A stunned silence fell over Ace's crew. Even the dumbest among them recognized the chasm between their boss and this newcomer. It wasn't that Ace was weak, it was that Nethin's strength was simply on another level. The victory was complete, and no one present dared deny it. Chapter 351, The Soul Fruit Appears. Cough! Ace's body slammed into the stone wall, his ribs screaming in protest. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and each ragged breath brought up another spurt. After a few desperate seconds, he wrenched himself free of the wall's shattered masonry and collapsed to his knees. He staggered upright, swaying as if the world itself were spinning around him. How could the difference be so great? His vision swam, but he managed to focus on Nethin, standing a short distance away. Ace's heart pounded. He'd heard how cunning Lafitte could be, and as one of the Ghost Hand Pirates' top officers, he had every reason to believe in his own crew's strength. Even as Ace captain, Ace considered himself Lafayette's equal. But the reality struck him like a hammer. Lafitte and Rhodes, Nethin's most trusted lieutenant, were not merely different, they were leagues apart. "Boss Ace, are you all right?" Several of Ace's men rushed forward, panic in their eyes as they reached for him. At the same moment, Nethin advanced slowly, his expression unreadable. Ace blinked, clearing the haze from his mind. With a sudden shove, he pushed away the hands that supported him and barked, "Stand down!" His voice cut through the turmoil like a blade. He pressed both fists together in front of his chest and straightened his back, every inch the fearless pirate captain he'd always been. Taking a deliberate step forward, Ace locked eyes with his opponent. This fight wasn't over yet. A scorching net of fire instantly wove itself behind Ace, cutting him off from his subordinates with a wave of blistering heat. The captain's crew stumbled back, panic in their eyes. "Captain, Boss Ace, what are you doing?" Someone shouted, but the flames had swallowed him from view. Ace made no effort to reassure them. Instead, he fixed his gaze firmly on Nethan, who was advancing without hesitation. "Our duel isn't over," Ace said quietly, though his words carried like steel. "So I can't go chasing after your underlings just yet." "Then stop stalling," Nethan replied coolly, meeting Ace's unblinking stare. Without another word, Ace swept his arms through the air, and the fire erupted in a frenzy. Circles of flame spun into monstrous pillars that shot skyward, then merged into a single colossal orb of molten light above them. "The Great Flame Ring!" Ace roared, hoisting the blazing sphere overhead like a second sun. His eyes blazed with unbreakable resolve. Nethan studied the inferno hanging over Ace's outstretched hand, instantly gauging the raw power contained within. This was no ordinary flame. It was a challenge, and neither of them would back down. Ace's fighting style was much like Luffy's. The more intense the battle, the stronger he became. His latest technique was devastating. He bellowed, "Burn!" and unleashed a colossal sun-like fireball straight at Nethan. Nethan held his ground. He curled the fingers of his right hand into a fist, and with a single, measured swing, met the onrushing inferno head-on. Boom! The fiery sphere slammed into his fist and abruptly froze, as if mud had solidified around some unseen core. Then the molten mass began to rotate, coalescing into a furious vortex of flame. Before anyone could flinch, Nethan's punch drove through it, and Ace's blazing attack collapsed in on itself like a dying ember. The shockwave tore through the street, buildings sheared apart, debris scattered everywhere, and the ground split open in a gaping chasm that reached toward the sky. Ace himself flew high and crashed to the town's edge, skidding to a stop in a heavy heap. He lay there, utterly still. Lafitte watched the scene with mild interest. Stretching languidly, he strolled over to Nethan and asked, "He shouldn't be dead from that, right? You planning to take him in?" Nethan hovered a few dozen meters above the deck and glanced back at Lafitte. "How are our people?" Lafitte tapped his cheek lightly. "We took plenty of wounds, but no one's dead. And the kid, he still has both hands." Ethan nodded once. "Very well, then leave him be. If he tries to stay longer, report it immediately." With that, his form shimmered. In an instant, he climbed another few hundred meters, slipped through the black energy arch at the edge of the island, and soared into the open sky. Inside the grand hall of Sky Island Palace, Rhodes had just returned from command post duty. Across the room, Robin was wrapping up a call. "So," she said, ending the transmission, "you managed to scorch his devil fruit powers. You don't plan to hold him here?" Nethan shook out his coat and let it fall silently to the marble floor. "A burned devil fruit is hardly worth guarding. We could keep him imprisoned and let the power fade over time, like what they did to Katakuri, but I'd rather see how the world reacts first." Robin arched an eyebrow. "You mean Ace? He went off to challenge Whitebeard instead of returning to his crew? That's unexpected." Nethan's dark eyes flickered with interest. "Exactly. If he loses, will he return to Whitebeard or strike out on his own? It's unpredictable, and that's precisely the point." He turned toward the tall windows overlooking the clouds. Lightning flashed in the distance, illuminating the ivory spires of the palace. "Let the pieces move. We'll see the shape of things to come." Rhodes and Robin exchanged a glance but said nothing further. In the hush that followed, the only sound was the whisper of wind against ancient stone and the quiet promise of upheaval on the horizon. Nethan sighed and shook his head. If Ace didn't join up now, the entire chain of events would derail, and he had no interest in chasing after someone else's story. Still, these were just minor ripples. With his current position, neither war nor intrigue could derail him from the real objective. All he needed to do was wait. Wait for the soul fruit to appear, seize it, and then use its telepathic link with the surgical fruit to set his plan in motion, to take down the four emperors once and for all. 3 months later, the news arrived. Fire-faced Ace had enlisted with the Whitebeard pirates. It was a bit abrupt, and yet, in its way, predictable. He'd scraped by against the Shichibukai Jinpei, then fallen to Whitebeard's overwhelming power, and finally pledged his loyalty to the old man's flag. As Robin relayed the details, Nethan propped his chin on one hand, watching the sea spray against the mirror-polished rail. A narrow victory over Jinpei was hardly surprising. Ace had needed that reminder of his own limits, but Whitebeard's intervention was unexpected. He'd foreseen many twists, but this addition still made him pause. A faint smile curved Nethan's lips. Mysterious plot devices, he mused silently, always appearing exactly when the story demands. Yet he shoved the thought aside. There would be time enough to indulge in narrative contrivances later. First things first, the soul fruit was still out there, and Nethan intended to claim it. Nethan had been sprawled across the sofa, half asleep, when the den mushi on Robin's desk chimed. Without so much as raising an eyebrow, she picked it up and pressed it to her ear. But after just 2 words, her calm facade slipped. Nethan, the soul fruit has appeared. At that simple announcement, Nethan's eyes flew open. The lazy haze vanished, replaced by a fierce tiger-like focus. He sat bolt upright. "Where?" he demanded, his voice low and urgent. Robin's gaze hardened as she squeezed the den mushi in one hand, drew a steadying breath and replied, "The Holy Land, Marijois." Chapter 352, The Holy Land. Mary Joa, Nethan echoed, his eyes narrowing as Robin's words sank in. "Are you absolutely sure?" Robin set the small listening bug onto the coffee table with a soft click. She met his gaze steadily. "Positive." Kaku confirmed it himself. A crackle and faint hiss came from the device before Kaku's calm, authoritative voice filled the room. "We've intercepted reports. The soul fruit turned up in Mary Joa. By the time our operatives relayed the sighting, the world government's retrieval teams had already secured it." At the mention of Mary Joa, Nethan's jaw clenched. Hidden behind the colossal walls of the Red Line, Mary Joa is the government's most fortified bastion, its private vault for devil fruits and other arcane relics. Even the highest-level intelligence cells struggle to gain access. It makes sense they'd keep a fruit as potent as the soul there. Robin said quietly, "It's become part of the government's centralized devil fruit repository." "Devil fruits are the bedrock of power in this world," Kaku continued. "Whether Paramecia, Zoan, or Logia, each grants abilities that can forge top-tier fighters in a heartbeat. The world government hoards them like treasure, building an arsenal no one else can match." Nethan stared at the bug, absorbing the gravity of the situation. So Mary Joa isn't just a stronghold, it's their ultimate devil fruit stockpile. He let out a slow breath. If the soul fruit is locked away there, retrieving it will be nearly impossible. Robin's expression hardened. "All the more reason we need a plan, and fast. If the government's vault grows any more secure, we'll never get a foothold." Silence fell, broken only by the faint hum of the listening device. Outside, the world carried on, oblivious to the power struggle unfolding in that small room. Inside, 2 determined figures braced themselves for the impossible task ahead, infiltrating Mary Joa and wresting the soul fruit from the clutches of the world government. Nethan couldn't shake the thought that Doflamingo might have obtained the burning fruit through back channels in the world government. After all, as a former celestial dragon, he had connections to the 5 elders. But with Doflamingo now dead, those questions died with him, no one left to answer them. He stared into the distance, mind racing. The world government had indeed uncovered the soul fruit. No one was surprised. No intelligence network on the planet could rival theirs. They tapped into the private communications of the 4 emperors and maintained observation seagulls patrolling the skies at all times. Their reach was so vast that intercepting every single message was impossible, so they allowed a few to slip through. "Are you absolutely certain it was bound for Mary Joa's?" Nethan asked, his voice low and steady. Kaku hesitated, then spoke with clipped efficiency. "Not at Mary Joa's yet, my lord, but it's almost at the Red Line continent. At this point, an ambush en route would be useless. I'm sorry, Lord Nethan, if only our intelligence had moved faster." A heavy note of regret lingered in his words. Nethan stared at the empty horizon and ground his teeth. If they'd arrived even half a day earlier, there might still have been a chance to snatch the soul fruit in transit. Now, there wasn't a moment to spare. The instant that devil fruit crossed into Mary Joa, the so-called Holy Land, it was as good as sealed away forever. Legends told of a slaver named Tiger, who years ago had infiltrated Mary Joa's outer dungeons and freed some captives by setting fires and prying open cages. Yet his raid never touched the true heart of the island. the heavily fortified vault at its center. That's where the world government stores its greatest prizes, especially devil fruits once wielded by the four emperors, like the soul fruit. Inside that vault stood the CP0 headquarters, under the direct authority of the Fleet Admiral Kong. Above even him loomed the five elders themselves. No pirate crew, no revolutionary force, and not even the fearsome Kaido had ever breached those walls. Deep down, Nathan knew they had missed their window. Marijoa's defenses were already tightening. The soul fruit would disappear into the most secure treasure house on the planet, and with it, their one chance at obtaining its power. Nathan watched the last wisp of smoke curl from his teacup and set it down, voice steady. Don't blame yourself. The world government's intelligence network outclasses ours. You did well to uncover the soul fruit's existence. Robin stood a few feet away, arms folded, her expression grave. She knew all too well the dangers of Marijoa, the Holy Land perched atop the red soil continent, where even the strongest pirating crews trembled at the Marine Admiral's shadow. What will you do now? She asked quietly. Nathan leaned forward, eyes flashing. I'm going to Marijoa. Robin's breath caught. You realize that's, and I don't say this lightly, insane? The Admiral's alone. He cut her off with a gentle shake of his head. I must have that fruit. Even if it means stepping into the demon's lair face to face, I'll break that devil's jaw and take the soul fruit for myself. She let out a slow sigh. It's been more than half a year since Whitebeard's war. You've spent all that time training, but your body's still stiff. If you go in like this, you'll be at a disadvantage even against someone like Ace. A confident smile curved Nathan's lips. Then this is the perfect moment. I need to know what secrets Marijoa guards. I'll shake loose every bone in my body if that's what it takes. Robin closed her eyes, pinching the bridge of her nose as she prepared herself and him for the perilous journey ahead. Nathan moved with that easy confidence Robin knew all too well. Once he made a decision, nothing could stop him. She opened her mouth to argue, but he didn't wait. Gently, he lifted her sharp, jade-like chin with a single finger so their eyes met. Marijoa can't bind me, he said quietly, his gaze steady. You understand the world government's power better than most. If we ignite a real war, the cost will be unimaginable, and the unknown losses even greater. Robin swallowed hard. He was right, of course. The world government had catalogued almost every corner of the Grand Line, the four emperors, the ghost hand pirates, even the darkest secrets of the New World. Yet Marijoa, the heart of the Holy Land, remained a complete blank on their maps. For 100 years, its throne had sat empty. No one knew who reigned above the five old stars. The elusive former commander of CP0, the admiral who once stood alongside Fleet Admiral Kong, nothing but whispers and half-buried rumors. That mystery had wrapped Marijoa in an impenetrable fog, a hellish abyss no one dared enter. Robin forced herself to calm her racing pulse. There was no turning him now. All right, she said, drawing a deep breath. Give me a moment. I'll gather everything we know about the world government, every dossier, every secret they'd rather keep buried. As she stepped away to her charts, Nathan's lips curved in a faint, determined smile. The die was cast. Whatever lay at the heart of Marijoa, he would uncover it, even if it meant challenging the mightiest power in the world. Since it was already underway, Nathan resolved there was no point in trying to stop it. Instead, he would help Rhodes defuse the crisis by passing along every scrap of intelligence he'd gathered on the Holy Land, Marijoa. He trusted his own strength, and he knew better than anyone that there was no such thing as too much information. He still couldn't slip into Marijoa himself, and he had yet to pinpoint exactly where the soul fruit was being kept. But half an hour later, Nico Robin returned, bearing a stack of reports and charts. Laid out before them were a detailed architectural map of the Holy Land, showing walls, districts, and key installations. Personnel files on Grand Marshal Gang Kuo, commander of the world government's military for SES there. Briefing dossiers on several other top-tier government officials. At first glance, Marijoa's defenses appeared deceptively straightforward. The red soil continent jutted out into the sea, cutting the Grand Line in two. Marijoa occupied the very heart of that junction, straddling the line between the first and second half. To the east lay the G1 naval base, the New World outpost that bristled with cannons and shore batteries. To the west stood Marineford, headquarters of the Navy's main fleet. Between them, the land was so thoroughly garrisoned that few dared even imagine an incursion. Just beyond the G1 base and before the ridged cliffs of Marineford, two vast red-hulled ports lay carved into the coastline. From these docks, fleets of ships could stream in every direction, reinforcing Marioa's defenses at a moment's notice. Nethan studied the map, tracing supply lines and patrol routes with his finger. "This is perfect," he said, meeting Rhodes's eyes. "With this level of detail, we can predict troop movements, intercept critical shipments, and, if we're extremely bold, even slip inside the walls. At the very least, we'll know exactly where to look for the soul fruit." Rhodes nodded, absorbing every line and annotation. Wherever their mission took them next, they would now go armed with a blueprint of the world government's most impregnable fortress, and a plan to undermine it from within. Nethan stepped off the government transport and into the hallowed precincts of Mary Jo. Towering overhead was the vast red earth continent itself, and at its forefront lay an immense artificial forest, an estate of meticulously arranged greenery. Nestled along its edge stood Pongal Castle, the very heart of world government power. Here, the 5 Elder Stars convened with Fleet Admiral Kong Ironbone, and this fortress alone admitted the highest-ranking Navy officers and government officials. Below Pongal Castle rose the Tianlongmen, Gate of the Celestial Dragons, beyond which only the Tenryu Bito, their slaves, and their attendants could venture. Neither commoners nor admirals dared tread those steps. Clutching the dossier on Admiral Kong, Nethan tried to piece together the rest of the power structure. The file chronicled Kong's reign as Fleet Admiral, how he shattered pirate fleets, subdued rebellions, and earned his fearsome moniker. Today, at an age rivaling Whitebeard's, he remained one of the world's most formidable figures. But when Nethan turned to the 5 Elder Stars, the records fell blank. No histories, no accomplishments, no personal details. It was as if they existed only to cast long shadows over the world, their true natures carefully concealed. Nethan flipped through the files as quickly as he could, but came up empty. There was nothing concrete on the 5 Old Stars, and even less on someone named Im. Hardly anyone knew Im existed, so it made sense the archives were silent. Robin leaned back in his chair. "They're a total unknown," he admitted. "But piecing together what little we've got, I'd say the 5 Old Stars aren't all fighters. At least, not anymore." Nethan nodded. "Even if they were fearsome in their youth, age catches up with everyone. Let's say each of them once rivaled admirals in power. Now, though, in terms of stamina, reflexes, sheer endurance, they'd be more on par with Marco or Katakuri. And honestly, if any of those legendary veterans showed up today, I'm confident I could handle them. Get in, get out, no problem." Robin frowned. "All of that is conjecture, based purely on our data crunching. We won't know the truth until you go to the Holy Land yourself." Chapter 353, Arrival at the Holy Land. The bubble gondola drifted over the sprawling plains of the Red Earth continent, then came to rest at Port Nober 3, gateway to the fabled Holy Land. A squad of world government officials disembarked, their arms laden with heavy crates branded heavenly gold. At last, their long voyage was over. Stepping onto the weathered docks, the delegates let out a collective sigh of relief. Despite the gondola's floating design, transporting such a fortune by air was never entirely safe. Even with CP0 agents flanking the shipment, rumors of pirate skirmishes and bandit ambushes had dogged this corridor for weeks. "You'd think extorting gold from starving nations would earn us some goodwill," one distraught official grumbled, brushing dust from his sleeve. But no. Those same countries scream foul play. If they can't scrape together the tribute, they're left to starve. Charming, isn't it? A CP0 operative in a stark black suit turned, his expression hidden behind a featureless mask. He waved a gloved hand dismissively. "Your part ends here. From this wharf, my team will see the cargo safely to the noble districts. They'll distribute it as the world government sees fit." "Understood," the officials replied, and without another word, they headed for the bubble cable car back to Panja Castle and the comforts of home. Almost immediately, the CP0 agents took charge. Their movements precise, every crate logged and stacked onto hover carts designed for secure ground-level transfer. None of them were new to the task of escorting heavenly gold. They worked in absolute silence, the only sound the hum of machines and the soft click of cargo locks engaging. At that moment, as the final gondola bell chimed above the quay, a lone figure slipped out from the shadowed alcove beside Warehouse 17. Tall and lithe, with keen eyes that missed nothing, he moved toward the gold-laden hover carts. This was Nethan, once known as Ross, arriving at the Holy Land with intentions as mysterious as the precious ore under guard. Captain Vamore of the CP0 detail stiffened as he glanced toward the horizon, brows knit in strange surprise. "Something wrong?" his second-in-command asked softly. Vamore shook his head. "No, it must be my imagination." Yet despite searching with his aura, he detected nothing out of the ordinary. Moments later, after the others had departed alongside Tian Shangjin, the air beside a crag of red stone quivered. The void itself seemed to buckle and twist, and a lone figure stepped through the rippling portal onto the scarlet soil. It was Nethan. Nethan had deliberately avoided the usual aerial approach to Mary Joa's holy territory. Intelligence reported that the skies above the island were laced with real-time surveillance arrays, ready to sound the alarm at even the faintest intrusion. Instead, he slipped in from beneath the waves, bending light and scrambling sound to move undetected through the depths. Emerging here on the Red Continent had been effortless, until that near encounter with Captain Vamore. He realized now that the light-bending cloaking technique, for all its power, could not fully mask his presence from a trained CP0 operative's keen senses. The captain had nearly spotted him. If he hoped to move through this land unseen, he would need something more, a method even more absolute. Taking a steadying breath, Nethan began to activate the final layer of his concealment, spatial cloaking, a forbidden art even more elusive than light distortion. Once engaged, no eye, no ear would be able to perceive him at all. And with that hidden edge, he would press on toward Mary Joa's heart, undetected, unstoppable. Nethan activated his spatial distortion, bending the air around him into a seamless cocoon. Any attack, even a full-force strike, would pass harmlessly through this warped layer, touching nothing but displaced space. Of course, the technique came at a price. Inside the distortion, he felt as though he were wading through molasses. Every step required him to fold and refold reality like a heavy quilt. Though he'd learned to inch forward this way, it drained his stamina at an alarming rate, and his progress was agonizingly slow. In practice, it was little more than a stationary stealth field. A golden glow lingered on the horizon as CP0 and the government officials withdrew. Nethan watched them go without so much as a flinch. He'd seen too much of the world's cruelty to be shaken now. The celestial dragons had reigned supreme for generations. Even without his intervention, their fall was inevitable. Yet here he stood, and he would be the one to pull them from their throne, not the Revolutionary Army, not the pirate era. With that unwavering resolve, he stepped forward. Nethan followed the gold-laden convoy through the sky, swiftly passing the artificial emerald forest that spreads across the first half of Marijois. Before long, he arrived at the heart of the world government's power, Pongal Castle. The fortress wasn't especially tall, but its broad stone walls and soaring battlements carried an undeniable air of majesty, far surpassing even the naval headquarters fortress he'd once reduced to rubble. After all, this was ground zero for the world's ruling authority. Its very stones seemed to hum with supremacy. From a discreet vantage point, Nethan studied the castle with a subtle gleam in his eye. He resisted the temptation to trigger his observation or hearing haki. Too few warriors have mastered both arts without alerting others to their presence, and he couldn't afford to be discovered yet. As he watched, he couldn't help but think of the 5 elders. They might be the highest-ranking celestial dragons, but titles alone didn't make them fearsome fighters. Would they dare step onto the battlefield? Nethan silently doubted it. The true measure of power, he knew, lay in deeds, not in gilded status. Nethan had never faced real combat, so raw power was out of the question for him. Even if the government's intelligence arm managed to assemble the finest devil fruits, no ordinary user could outmatch a Navy admiral. What truly unnerved Rhodes, however, were the hidden hands pulling the strings. How did Doflamingo discover that the Op no Mi could perform the so-called immortality surgery? Undoubtedly, someone in history must have unlocked its full potential, someone who perhaps has already lived for centuries. Imagine the possibilities. Physical peak may fade with age, but senses like sight and hearing could become monstrously acute. Strength could grow to a frightening degree. Rhodes was certain. A man who's lived a few hundred years could tear a ship's mast apart with one hand. Yet worry isn't the same as fear. Today, Rhodes stands acknowledged as the world's strongest man. He's never trembled before the world government, and now that his supremacy is absolute, fear is simply impossible. As long as nothing goes wrong, Nathan murmured under his breath, the soul fruit will be secured in the central vault, but we still need to confirm its arrival. Nathan slipped through the twilight shadows toward Maria Joa's holy land, where vast armories bristled with every kind of weapon and forbidden artifact. Beyond the public stores lay the fabled core vault, home to the realm's most prized treasures. Not even a Tianlong master dared touch its contents without express permission from the 5 Elder Stars. Thanks to painstaking intelligence work, Nathan knew exactly where that vault was hidden, a discovery that set his plan in motion. Drawing a steady breath, he activated his light-bending technique. In an instant, the air around him shimmered and folded, reforming his features into those of a high-ranking government official he'd memorized long ago. Calm and confident, he approached Pongal Castle's main gate. Aside from a handful of top-tier sensory cultivators, most guards relied on ordinary sight and hearing, and illusions like his could fool them easily. Within moments, he reached the gate, and the sentries snapped to attention. They bowed sharply as he passed, never questioning the official's identity. With the outer defenses behind him, Nathan stepped into the courtyard, ready to press deeper into the fortress and closer to the heart of the core vault. Nathan stepped through the gates of Pongal Castle and set off down its winding corridors, his eyes scanning every detail. After completing a careful circuit of the fortress, he turned his attention to the matter at hand, the soul fruit. It had been some time since he'd last taken on an intelligence-gathering mission, but he still held himself to exacting standards. It didn't take long. Within the hour, Nathan confirmed what he suspected. The soul fruit had been shipped to the Holy Land of Mary Joa just 1 day earlier. There, it was logged into the castle's core warehouse, exactly where he'd hoped it would be. Chapter 354, Violent Breaking the Door. Nathan's eyes flickered once, and in an instant he appeared in the deepest recesses beneath the Holy Land of Mary Joa, the core warehouse. Though both this hidden vault and the surface warehouse sat under the city's foundations, the core repository was far more secretive and heavily guarded. Here, far below the crystalline spires and gleaming marble, lay the world's ugliness on full display. Endless, self-walking trails stretched in every direction, not driven by gears or steam, but by human muscle. Celestial dragons found it more entertaining, and a potent reminder of their own supremacy, to force pariahs into endless labor, rather than let Vegapunk replace these ancient contraptions with efficient machinery. Nathan melted into the darkness. Bending the light around him, he rendered himself invisible, undetectable unless someone swept the shadow with dominant haki. In this sepulchre of secrets, he was both hunter and phantom. Now, all he had to do was reach the inner vault and shatter the locks that barred him from the truth. Nathan stood in Mary Joa's vast underground chambers. Thanks to the intel he'd acquired and a detailed map, he had quickly located the enormous warehouse along the northern flank. 4 sentries stood posted before its door, while 2 patrol teams crisscrossed the area, but none had spotted him yet. Drawing close to the warehouse wall, Nathan paused. Then, with a barely audible crackle, he pressed his palm against what appeared to be solid stone, and the surface gave way like muddy sludge. His hand slipped through a momentary void, and in the next instant he stepped across the threshold. Almost before he could turn, the wall snapped back into place behind him, flawless and unbroken. It wasn't the wall that had shifted, but the space itself. Inside lay a dimly lit cathedral of arms. Beneath the muted glow of overhead lamps, row upon row of standard swords, rifles, and crates of ammunition marched off into darkness. The scale was staggering, far beyond anything the Navy's own arsenals could hope to match. Whenever a fleet ran low, its officers had no choice but to requisition supplies from exactly this world government stockpile. Nathan moved forward, his footsteps echoing across the polished floor. Each careful step carried him deeper among the armaments, where he would carry out the mission he'd risked everything to complete. Nathan knew the warehouse was under continuous surveillance, but he didn't care. By subtly bending the ambient light, he rendered every camera in the vast hall powerless. His movements flickered in and out of view, and within a minute he'd slipped past the main storage area and come around to the back. There stood the true heart of the complex. A small, fortress-like building hewn from hailstone. It was dwarfed by the outer armory, where standard swords and firearms were kept, but this had to be the core vault. Nathan paused to study its walls. They were astonishingly thick, almost certainly built in alternating layers of hailstone and high-strength steel, exactly the sort of composite the outer defenses of an advancing city would use. As the central repository for whatever secrets lay inside, it would be no less secure than those massive city walls. The hailstone layers might not rival the legendary hardness of the ancient runestones, but their sheer thickness and multi-layered design would disperse any force evenly. Still, given his abilities, Nathan was confident he could breach it. He flexed his fingers, already plotting his next move. Nathan stood before the outer wall of the core warehouse, tracing its surface with narrowed eyes. From the outside, the massive structure seemed impenetrable. Layer upon layer of high-loose stone sealed its interior completely. Yet spatial power ought to transcend any mere wall. If he could bend the fabric of the void, he might tunnel straight through. He extended his hand, concentrating on the space before him. The air shimmered as he drew on his reserve of spatial energy, hoping to forge a conduit from one idea of the barrier to the other. But the high-loose stone acted like a magnetic field, scrambling his positional scans and resisting every probe. No matter how fiercely he willed it, the stone repelled his rift. The distorted void flickered, and then snapped back to its original flatness. Nathan sighed. His specialty had always been thousand-mile contraction, reducing vast distances to a single, manageable step. It wasn't real teleportation. He could never summon himself out of thin air the way the legendary slaughterhouse techniques did. Mastering a true spatial leap, like the flight of Thor or Kamui's dimensional slash, remained beyond him. He'd poured countless hours into research and experimentation, only to hit dead end after dead end. The wall before him was as impervious as ever. He shook his head, resting his gaze away from the unyielding stone. "If I can't tunnel through," he murmured, "then I'll have to find another way in." With that resolve, Nathan turned away from the core warehouse and stepped into the gathering dusk, already plotting his next move. A sudden chill flickered in Nathan's eyes as he stepped toward the thick stone wall. He curled his right hand into a tight fist and, gathering every ounce of his strength, unleashed a single, thunderous punch. Boom! The impact was astonishing. It carried the raw power of Rhodes at the height of his might, on par with Whitebeard in his prime. The shock wave rippled outward, shaking the entire underground warehouse as though an earthquake had struck. Weapons clattered from their racks, and the stationed guards staggered, swaying dangerously as they fought to stay upright. What's happening? "Is it an earthquake?" one guard blurted, bracing himself against a support beam. His companions exchanged bewildered glances. No one on the Red Earth continent had ever felt a tremor like this. Before they could answer, another boom rolled through the caverns. This time the tremor raced all the way to the surface, rippling across the Red Earth itself. Even in distant Pongal Castle, porcelain teacups leapt and shattered, their pieces tinkling like distant thunder. "What on earth was that?" the castle guards shouted, rushing to peer out the windows. Commander-in-Chief Kong's steel skeleton rose in one swift motion. The 5 ancient stars, each among the army's most formidable warriors, teetered on the ornate sofa before scrambling to their feet, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. At their feet lay a shattered porcelain teacup, its fragments glinting like broken teeth. Before anyone could utter a word, a deafening roar split the air. Boom, boom, boom! Shock waves rippled through the sky, shaking the very foundations of the holy land of Mary Joa. In the Tianlong clan's enclave behind the Dragon Gate, pandemonium erupted. Countless Tianlong guards screamed and scattered in terror. Some vaulted onto their slave beasts, frantic to flee, while ordering the chained laborers to crawl ahead. The frightened captives tumbled off, crashing into overturned tables. Wood splintered, debris scattered, and the courtyard transformed into a frenzied tide of fleeing soldiers and flailing limbs. Meanwhile, deep beneath the surface in the underground core vault, Nethin's gauntleted fists struck the reinforced bulkhead with unrelenting force. Each blow thundered through the corridor. No finesse, no ceremony, just raw determination. Boom, boom. Under Nethin's relentless barrage, the outer wall of the central vault began to warp and splinter. First came the seafloor stone, ancient, pressure-forged rock that would have held firm against most assaults, but his fists shattered it like brittle glass. Through the widening fissures, the Yardman's steel reinforcement peeked through, gleaming coldly. Nethin hammered it without pause. Each strike rang out like a hammer on an anvil until the steel buckled and fragmented, shards clattering to the ground. Behind that, a layer of dense, pitch-black ore revealed itself, an unfamiliar material that seemed to quiver under the force of his blows. Still, it offered no real resistance. Crack by crack, Nethin's fists drove deeper, pulverizing what stood in his way. We didn't know how many structural layers the vault held, how many failsafes and support frames lay buried beneath the surface, but whatever they weren't built to withstand this assault. With a final thunderous roar, the last barrier gave way. A blast of dust and shattered debris erupted outward as Nethin's fist punched clean through to the vault's heart, where the hidden ore lay exposed and humming with latent power. In that moment, the true scale of his strength, and whatever treasures the vault contained, became terrifyingly clear. With a roar that shook the earth, Rhodes shattered the entire outer wall, tearing a 3-foot-wide hole through it. Chapter 355, The General Marshal of the Army. Nethin stared at the ruined cavern wall, rubbing the back of his head where a stray stone had struck him. His blow had been far too powerful. Chunks of rock and twisted iron lay scattered around him. He could only hope they hadn't crushed the devil fruit hidden inside. In theory, even a broken devil fruit could still be eaten, but if its flesh was ground into dust, retrieving and reassembling the pieces would be a logistical nightmare. Besides, only the first person to consume a devil fruit gains its power. No matter how simultaneous two people might try to eat the same fruit, the laws of time insist on an order, down to fractions of a second. If the soul fruit had shattered here, Nethin would have to collect every last shard himself. Otherwise, some agent of the world government, or a rival treasure hunter, could swoop in and claim those pieces for themselves. He let out a slow breath and stopped smashing. Although he could have punched clear through a 3-foot-thick wall, he didn't want to collapse the entire core vault. As long as even the smallest gap remained, Rhodes's ability to expand that opening from the inside could let him slip in and seize the fruit. The repository's foundations held firm, but it was time for a different strategy. Nethin stepped back, palms clenched, determined to seal this vault completely before anyone else got the chance. Nethin studied the construction of the unloading deck and its load-bearing layer with appreciative eyes. Even if Rhodes struck with full force, the worst that would happen was a localized puncture, far from a total collapse. The core vault itself was modest in size. Against its back wall stood several antique wooden cabinets and sturdy crates. A few of those crates had already been shattered by flying stones and iron fragments, spilling their contents onto the floor. Scattered among the wreckage were true rarities, devil fruits of every shape and hue, the gleaming blades of one of the 12 great swordmasters, and pear-drop sapphires no larger than half a palm, their facets glinting like captured starlight. Yet Nethin barely spared them a glance. He had come only for one item, the coveted soul fruit. Everything else could wait. No sooner had Rhodes forced his way into the heart of the vault than the artificial tremor ceased. But the panic it provoked among the Tianlong forces had already claimed heavy casualties. Some of the less fortunate had even perished beneath falling masonry. Outside the vault, in the highest echelons of Pongal Castle's hierarchy, the army's commander-in-chief, Cyborg Kong, stood flanked by senior officials and the 5 old stars. His mechanical arm glowed faintly as he barked his orders. "Report, what's the origin of that quake? And why are our men lying dead where they stand? Report to Chief Marshal and the 5 elders. An aide from the world government burst into the command chamber, trembling as he spoke. The source of the tremors, it's coming from underground, our core warehouse. Every face in the room went pale. The core warehouse was one of the government's most tightly secured facilities. Video cameras, audio bugs, radar motion detectors, life sign scanners, nothing escaped its watchful eye. For a moment, the assembled officials froze. Then, led by Chief Marshal Steel Skeleton and the 5 elders, they sprang into action, racing to their consoles to verify the report. "What's happening down there?" Steel Skeleton demanded. The aide swallowed hard. "Sir, the outer wall's been breached. It isn't an accident. There's a pirate inside. Ghost Hand Rhodes." At the name, the 5 elders exchanged grim glances. Ghost Hand Rhodes was a notorious infiltrator, famed for slipping through the strictest security nets. If he'd made it into the warehouse, the world government's most precious stores were now at risk. Chief Marshal Steel Skeleton slammed his fist on the table. "Mobilize every available unit. Seal off the entire complex, and don't let anyone in or out until we've contained High M." As red alarms began to wail, the aides scrambled for their orders. Below ground, in the dim corridors of the core warehouse, Ghost Hand Rhodes was already at work, and nothing would stop him from reaching his target. The core vault hadn't just been damaged, it'd been breached, and the intruder was none other than Ghost Hand Rhodes. This changes everything. If Rhodes makes off with even a portion of what's stored within, no one, not the other 4 emperors, nor the Navy headquarters, will be able to contain the Ghost Hand pirates. Where's CP0? All units in the area converge on the core vault immediately. The 5 Elder Stars snapped into action at once, barking orders. General Marshal Gang Gukong's face went ashen. Sensing the crisis's magnitude, he bolted from the command chamber and raced straight for the underground base's core vault. CP0 operatives in the Cyborg Division responded with unprecedented speed. Admiral Wu Lao Sing, momentarily relieved that reinforcements were on the move, let that relief give way to pure rage. How dare anyone violate Mary Joa, the sacred land? Its core vault sits directly beneath Fongal Castle, the most heavily fortified stronghold in the world. Years ago, Tiger the Fishman made his name by setting fire to the outermost slave prison, freeing a handful of captives, and diving overboard to escape. Now, Rhodes has struck at the very heart of Mary Joa's holy land. He slipped beneath the foundations of Pongal Castle and shattered his way into the central vaults. Insanity. In the council chamber, the 5 elders sat rigid with barely contained fury. Just then, a breathless messenger burst in, carrying grim tidings from the Dragon Domain. The violent breach had collapsed several buildings. In the ensuing panic, terrified citizens trampled one another. 4 were grievously injured, 13 suffered minor wounds, and 2 lay dead. Overwhelmed by fear, the Dragonfolk urgently demanded the presence of the Marine Admiral and every available CP0 agent for protection. The official's voice shook as he finished. Elder Wu Laoxing clenched his fists. Rhodes had struck at their core repository, killing and wounding their people, and now dared to summon CP0 reinforcements? It was maddening. He couldn't help but recall Tiger's audacious breakout all those years ago, and wonder when this chaos would ever end. After the fire, the terrified celestial dragons had begged the CP0 agents for protection. Moved by their panic, the agents halted the arrests. By the time the Navy fleet arrived, every last dragon had vanished into the night. Deep within Panglay Castle on Mary Joa lies a sealed chamber so secret that even most world government officials don't know it exists. Only a handful are permitted entry. Tonight, the room's ornate flower courtyard lay in ruins, petals scattered across shattered marble, walls cracked as if by an earthquake. A lone figure clad in black stood among the wreckage, surveying the destruction in silence. "It seems something catastrophic has occurred here, Lord Im," came a quiet voice from the darkness. Im said nothing, his eyes narrowed on the fallen blossoms. "Shall I proceed with a full investigation?" the shadow asked. Im remained silent, weighing his next move. Far below the palace, in the core repository of the Holy Land, Mary Joa, alarms had already sounded. In the labyrinth of vaults and corridors, every defense had been breached. Amid the chaos, Rhodes, a veteran operative, searched frantically through overturned crates and scattered documents. At last he spotted it, a single, peculiarly shaped devil fruit, cradled in a broken wooden box. Its surface rippled with swirling patterns, like souls drifting in an unseen current. Rhodes's breath caught in his throat. He had memorized every line of the soul fruit's marking long ago. This was exactly what he'd been looking for. Nethin slipped the soul fruit into his cloak pocket and surveyed the scattered devil fruits around him. He didn't recognize most of them, but he knew that the ancient animal varieties were not notoriously dangerous, while the natural and phantom beast types were among the rarest. He already possessed the soul fruit. There was no need to be greedy. Still, these spoils were too valuable to leave behind. With swift efficiency, Nethin gathered every loose treasure, 2 supreme swords, a dozen mastercrafted tools, and half a dozen apex artifacts, wonders even Fishman Island could not claim. He tore off a length of ribbon and cinched his cloak shut, hefting the heavy bundle onto his shoulders. Then he retraced his steps to the rip in reality he'd carved moments before. Pressing his hand against the shimmering void, Nethin felt the fabric of space yield. He stepped through and found himself on firm ground once more. To his left stood a row of CP0 agents, dead-eyed, expressionless, the foremost wearing wire-rimmed glasses that caught the light and made his gaze all the colder. Directly before him loomed a broad-shouldered man with a shaved head. The man's slow, deliberate footsteps resonated through the chamber like rolling thunder, each one sending a jolt of tension through the air. Nethin paused, every muscle coiled, as the silent sentinel advanced. Nethin had once served as an admiral in the Navy and now held the esteemed rank of General Marshal of the world government, a position that even eclipsed the great warlords of the Warring States era. Yet the steel in his heart, once resolute and unbreakable, had grown hollow and empty. Chapter 356, Strength, Air. Steelbone's eyes went cold as he activated his ghost hand technique, spectral fingers reaching for the cloth satchel slung over Nethin's shoulder. "Put it down," he ordered, his voice as unyielding as steel. He had no idea what the man had taken from the core vault, but every single item stored there was priceless. There was no way Nethin could walk out of here with it. Nethin glanced back at him, one hand drifting casually to the bag's worn strap, as if he were merely a traveler rather than a trespasser. "So you're the Air Force Marshal," he said, his tone light but laced with challenge. "Former Navy Admiral, now Supreme Commander of the entire fleet. No doubt you were legendary in your youth, a terror of the high seas. Before the great pirate era even began, the only one to ever defeat you was that old vampire phantom beast. He fought alone, no crew, yet held his own against both the Roger Pirates and Whitebeard's fleet. His strength was the stuff of legends." Nethin shrugged, a hint of a grin playing on his lips. "But that was another time. Let's see if you still have what it takes." His gaze swept over the silent agents of CP0 standing behind Steelbone. Calm and confident, Nethin waited, ready to prove that the age of legends was far from over. When his words died on the air, Nethin sprang to his right, vanishing in a blur toward the empty space. If this weren't the holy land of Mary Gioia, and if he didn't have that cumbersome package strapped to his back, he might have lingered to toy with the steel-boned warrior. But there was no time for play. Whoosh! In the blink of an eye, he reappeared hundreds of meters away. He was about to bolt again when a figure rocketed toward him like a missile, its explosive power tearing down the intervening distance. Before Nethin could brace himself, a monstrous fist crashed into his back, the roar of displaced air whipping past his ear. Tossed through the air, Nethin twisted mid-flight and launched a counter-strike. He'd never known fear in a straight-up fight. Boom! His fist, crackling with coiling energy, collided with the steel warrior's jet-black gauntlet in a thunderous blast. It sounded like a bomb detonating beneath an unbreakable lid, sending shockwaves rippling through the clearing. The armored figure reeled, its weaponized arm swinging uselessly as it staggered back. Nethin's fist rocked Steelbone Kong back on his heels, a feat no one but the greatest legends could claim. Even as commander-in-chief of the entire Navy, that steel-skinned colossus, who had crushed the seas and routed countless pirate fleets, stood no chance in a straight-up fight with Nethin. At under 30, and in the prime of his life, Nethin was nearly unbeatable one-on-one. Kong reeled, but his hockey-reinforced arm recovered almost instantly. Nethan flexed his bruised knuckles, surprised by just how strong Kong's armament hockey had been. It stung, and yet the blow had barely slowed his enemy, thanks to Kong's phenomenal regeneration. Nethan cocked his head, studying the commander's stance. That punch of his, the power behind it was unreal, more like something born of a devil fruit than mere muscle. It rivaled Whitebeard's greatest strikes, perhaps even Garp's, an intensity no human physiology should produce unaided. He allowed himself a faint smile. There were fruits that granted speed, lightning-fast reflexes, and there were fruits like Momonosuke's that boosted size, strength, and speed all at once. Why, then, shouldn't there be one singularly devoted to ultimate strength? A power fruit of sorts, pushing the body past every natural limit. As Nethan straightened, his eyes gleamed with curiosity and ambition. Perhaps it was time for a new era to begin, and for legends old and new to make way. Nethan's legendary ability, Steelbone Hollow, transmuted his very skeleton into living steel, making his bones virtually unbreakable. When he released his power, the shockwave rippled through the air like a thunderclap, bending the surrounding atmosphere. Steel Gukong stood motionless, eyeing the astonishment blazing behind his eyes. Time had taken its toll on him. His muscles weren't as quick as they once were, but his physique remained the stuff of legend. He'd once faced Admiral Whitebeard without a flicker of doubt. Back then, Whitebeard hadn't yet earned the title of strongest man in the world. Yet now, before Nethan, even his fiercest blows were effortlessly repelled. Every strike he threw met an immovable steel defense, driving him back in a way he hadn't experienced in decades. A cold realization settled over him. Nethan had grown into a force beyond reckoning. Steel Gukong clenched his jaw, swallowing a mix of pride and regret. He'd been among the few insiders who learned of Nethan's true potential, and he'd underestimated him. The sting of that mistake cut deeper than any wound. A sudden rush of wind signaled Nethan's next advance. The young man's aura flared once more, and Steel Gukong braced himself for the battle yet to come. Nethan slammed back against the empty steel framework, grit flashing in his eyes. He pivoted on one foot and activated his moon step, rocketing into the sky with his right fist poised for a decisive strike. He meant to burst through the ceiling of this cavern and vanish into open air, but an eerie force seized him mid-leap. The next thing he knew, every molecule of air around him was being sucked away. His lungs burned as though they were being emptied from the inside out, and his limbs trembled. At 12,000 meters altitude, gravity and thin air already made aerial maneuvers brutal, but he'd never once missed a moonstep before. Now, suspended in a silent, crushing vacuum, he staggered helplessly. A moment later, the new CP0 chief materialized beneath him, face unreadable in the dim light. Without warning, the chief clenched his fist and called out a single phrase, "Air cannon." A roaring column of supercompressed air erupted around Nethan, carrying such force that it cracked the cavern's thick rock ceiling in an instant. Nethan's body was whipped sideways, high-altitude winds buffeting him like a battering ram. As dust and stone rained down, he fought to regain control, if only he could draw breath again. But the chief's invisible vacuum still clung to him, and the next attack was already forming in the dark space below. Boom! Boom! The new CP0 chief didn't hesitate for a single breath. He unleashed 2 thunderous air cannon blasts, then seemed to ripple through the air itself, phasing around Nethan with inhuman speed and striking relentlessly. Colossal columns of compressed air surged up in rapid succession, hemming Nethan in on all sides. The vacuum field condensed into a single earth-shattering explosion, blowing the ground upward and parting the clouds to show a flash of blue sky. When the dust settled, Nethan hovered unscathed in midair. He raised a steady hand to the void before him, warping the space into a shimmering barrier. No matter how dense the air or how powerful the blast, it could not tear through this rift. This was the very limit of his devil fruit's power. Sunset. Nethan narrowed his eyes as he studied the CP0 chief. "No," he murmured. "The natural air fruit, one of the world government's finest creations. A top-tier devil fruit. Its vacuum field alone is enough to pulverize anyone who lacks supreme physical resilience." He steadied his stance, bracing himself for the next move. The battle had only just begun. Nethin's air cannon had just slammed down with a force that likely outmatched even a swipe from the Chiwuhai tyrant bear's paw. After all, this was the power to command the very air itself. Chapter 357, Gravity. The world government's secret was deceptively simple. Find a CP0 captain or deputy chief who excelled in every field, feed him the air fruit, and instantly you had someone on par with an admiral. That single appointment formed the backbone of their entire power structure, and now that weight rested squarely on Nethin's shoulders. CP0's newest weapon, a high-velocity air cannon, rained down upon him, but Nethin met the blast head-on. By subtly twisting gravity around his body, he absorbed and deflected the assault, then rocketed skyward. In the rarefied air above, where oxygen thinned to near vacuum and his usual moon steps were useless, he relied on gravitational manipulation alone. Freed from atmospheric drag, he accelerated with breathtaking speed. "Don't think you can flee," roared Steel Gukong. With a single deafening stomp, he shattered the earth, cracking the landscape in every direction. The same explosive force hurled Gukong into the sky at what must have been supersonic velocity. In an instant, he closed the distance to Nethin and unleashed a punishing punch. Clutching the precious burden in his left hand, Nethin had only his right arm free. He tightened his fist, braced himself for impact, and prepared to strike back. Because failure here would mean more than personal defeat. It would topple the very foundation of the world government's might. Nethin curled his lip in a cold sneer and drove his elbow square into Steelbone Kong's armored fist. A glint of steel-blue arrogance flared around his limb as he hit. Boom! The impact sent the hollow-bodied warrior off balance. He had nothing solid beneath him to absorb the blow and was cast sprawling through the air. "Damn it!" the CP0 chief spat under his breath. Reluctantly, he deactivated the vacuum domain. As long as that field held, neither Nethin nor Steelbone Kong could fully employ their moonstep techniques, and though Nethin could still take to the air, his enemies would be left crippled. The moment the vacuum barrier collapsed, Steelbone Kong sprang into action. He unleashed the highest form of the moonstep, hurtling after Nethin in the sky like a living afterimage. Whoosh, whoosh! But Nethin didn't break stride. He tapped into his spatial distortion ability and vanished 1,000 meters away in an instant. He wasn't quite on the level of the legendary flying thunder god, but in a straight chase, few could hope to keep up with him at close quarters. Nethin's heart raced as he activated his space distortion ability. Even accounting for the slight delay before the power kicked in, it still outstripped the impenetrable steel bone domain, strongest form of Kong's Yubu technique, by a mile. Whoosh! In only a few hurried steps, he'd already left the cold, ironclad prison behind. Just as he prepared to vault across an expanse of thousands of meters in a single bound, an invisible force yanked at him like the jaws of some vast, unseen trap. Black prison, he realized in alarm. A crushing gravity pulled him back toward the ground so abruptly that his chest caved in, breath ripping from his lungs. Nethin's eyes narrowed. He planted his feet, muscles coiling beneath his skin as he wrenched free of the pull. But his cargo, the precious artifacts and supplies he carried, couldn't withstand the brutal strain. With a sound like tearing silk, the items shattered and scattered, tumbling downward into the abyss. "Damn it!" Nethin snarled, crimson light flaring behind his eyes. He slammed his palm against the empty air. With a surge of concentrated will, he twisted the fabric of space again, this time not merely to slip through it, but to crush it. The tendrils of the black prison buckled, twisted, then imploded in on themselves. A soft, resonant hum echoed around him as the prison collapsed into nothingness. Free once more, Nethin gathered the remnants of his scattered gear, determination burning fierce in his gaze. He would not be held back, not by iron, gravity, or any other force in the universe. Nethin's power flared, and the empty space nearly a kilometer beneath them trembled as if hit by an invisible hammer. In an instant, that void collapsed inward, driven downward by his will alone. Since his battle with Whitebeard, Nethin's mastery of spatial distortion had soared. This was his first successful use of pure spatial suppression. It was like erecting an unseen wall of pressure that crushed everything below. Only the strongest, those with top-tier armament Haki or another space-type devil fruit, could survive such an onslaught. Lesser foes would either flee or be ground to dust. Standing firm at the epicenter was Steelbone Kong, ready to take the full brunt of Nethin's assault. He crossed his arms, cloaked them in thick armament haki, and planted his feet, if only he had solid ground beneath him. On firm earth, Kong's haki might have held, but he was hovering by moonwalk, floating with no solid foothold. The moment the collapsing space wall pressed down, there was nothing for him to brace against. His super-dense armor cracked under the weight of Nethin's spatial squeeze, and with a roar of effort, Kong plummeted into the void he'd tried to resist. Nethin's spatial barrier flickered, then shattered, hurling him from the sky back down to solid ground. He landed on one knee, grit in his teeth, and immediately braced himself for the next onslaught. The newly appointed CP0 chief's lips curled in surprise. He thrust both arms forward and wove his haki into a translucent wall of compressed air. The shield rippled in the air before him, its edges dancing like heat on pavement. But Nethin's waning space field was on an entirely different level. With a thunderous crack, it sliced through the air barrier as if it were nothing more than mist, and then bore down toward him. Before the chief could recover, a third figure strode from the shadows. Clad in the same black cloak as the 5 old stars, his face betraying no emotion, he raised his empty palms toward the collapsing space rift. A tangible hush fell over the battlefield. "Black prison," he intoned. Dark energy surged around his, coalescing into a rotating vortex of inky blackness. The very fabric of surrounding space warped and twisted toward that ominous swirl. In an instant, what remained of Nethin's fallen barrier was drawn apart and devoured by the abyssal maelstrom, leaving him and his enemies at the mercy of its relentless pull. When the shimmering barrier at last dissolved, Nethin flexed his right hand. The yawning void overhead collapsed in on itself, compressing into a small obsidian sphere that rocketed skyward. What in the world? Nethin muttered, lifting his body to evade it. But before he could fully clear the spot, the orb unleashed a titanic gravitational pull. It locked onto him like a cosmic magnet, yanking him off his feet. All around, the scarlet earth groaned and split. Chunks of red-soiled crust, some the size of hills, fractured free and flew upward toward the sphere, drawn by that same invisible force. Nethin's heart thundered. He recognized the phenomenon at once. This was no ordinary trick of space or flame. It was the power of a true gravity fruit, the ultimate devil fruit that governed not only the pull of weight, but the very laws of up and down. Lesser fruits might toy with levitation or slight shifts in mass, but this ability bent the fundamental force that holds worlds together. He'd scoured every Holy Land archive for records of such a power, no mention among the 5 old stars, no ancient scroll or whispered legend. Whoever wielded this fruit must be a hidden titan, a name lost to history. The orb's gravitational field intensified. Nethin fought to plant his feet, resisting the drag that threatened to lift him off the ground entirely. Jagged boulders and shards of earth buzzed around him, converging like a swarm of iron bees. If he slipped now, he'd be torn apart or sent hurtling into the stratosphere. Summoning every ounce of will, Nethin locked his legs and centered his mind. He refused to let this dark sphere claim him. Muscles quivering, he leapt forward, driving high, weight against the pull. The world around him blurred, then, with a final, roaring effort, he broke free, crashing to one knee as the orb hovered a dozen paces overhead, pulsing ominously. He stared up at that small, inky globe. A single truth crystallized in his mind. This was only the beginning. Whoever controlled that gravity fruit had thrown down the gauntlet, and Nethin would need every shred of courage and every secret he'd yet to uncover to face what came next. So far, only 3 individuals have appeared. The 5 elder stars haven't shown themselves, and even Im has detected nothing. Such is the terrifying scale of the world government's hidden power. "Distortion," Nethin shouted, sweeping his arm through the air and warping gravity itself. 2 invisible forces met in the void, tearing at the fabric of nothingness. The gravitational assault radiated outward on a massive scale, pulling even the CP0 agents and the steel bone construct off balance and preventing them from pressing their attack on Nethin. "Black prison," growled the gravity fruit user, expression numb, as he yanked at the floating debris, devil fruits, supreme sharp knives, and glittering gems hovering around them. Alarm flickered across Nethin's face. He clenched his right hand, unleashing a fresh wave of distortion. A thunderous crack echoed as the two fields collided. 7, or maybe 8, devil fruits exploded into fragments mid-air, showering the scene with shattered husks. A stab of pain seared through Nethin's chest. The scabbards of the supreme sharp knives bent and splintered under the stress. Only the gems, crystalline as sea tower stones, remained whole. Their chains lay broken at the feet of both combatants. But the battle was far from over. Nethin studied the shredded steel frame, and it was worse than the Rhodes model. Rhodes might drip blood. This thing gushed it in a steady torrent. As the newly appointed chief of CP0, his jaw twitched in frustration. One of those missing fruits had been the air fruit he himself had consumed. If Wu Laoxing discovered that 7 or even 8 devil fruits had been destroyed in the central vault, their outrage alone would shake Pangal Castle to its foundations. Chapter 358, Harvest. A hush fell over the battlefield as Nethin's fury ignited his distortion power. The air warped around him, his very presence bending space itself. With a thunderous roar, he slammed his fist into the swirling black sphere of condensed gravity. The orb shattered violently, sending jagged boulders and shattered earth plummeting back to the ground. Seizing the moment, Nethin wrenched at the ruptured field with his right hand. In a flash, the gravitational barrier tore open like fabric, and he plunged his arm into the breach. When he withdrew it, he held 4 devil fruits, legendary treasures the world government had monopolized for generations. Including the soul fruit already in his possession, Nethin now controlled 5 of these mythical artifacts. If each lived up to the power of the air and gravity fruits he'd mastered, he possessed enough strength to eclipse any force on the seas. No less ruthless than a world leader's coup, he had just stolen the richest haul from directly beneath the world government's nose. Gently, he wrapped the 4 fruits in the hidden folds of his robe, their mottled skins pulsing with latent power. He offered no words of triumph. His steely gaze was all the announcement he needed. With a single, decisive step, Nethin lifted off the ground and vanished into the sky, leaving behind a world forever altered by his harvest. Gangukong let out a savage roar and surged skyward with his moonstep, hot on Nethin's heels. But Nethin activated his twisting power, and in the blink of an eye he'd blurred into a distant black dot, discarding the steel-bone staff he'd been tethered to as though it were nothing. Damn it! Gangukong hovered in midair, fists clenched so tight his knuckles crackled. He'd never felt such fury. Worse still was the dread of how Wu Laoxing would react when he learned of this failure. A headache throbbed in his temples at the very thought. Beside him, the newly promoted CP0 chief's lips twitched in silent annoyance. They were 3 of the deadliest operatives on the seas, and yet here they were, unable to contain one boy. He remembered all too well the ignominy that had befallen his predecessor, and he was determined not to share the same fate. Above them, the last member of their trio, a gravity fruit user, floated motionless, his devil fruit power allowing him to defy gravity as easily as breathing. He scanned the sky where Nethin had vanished, then cast an inquiring look at his companions. "High Prison? Why are you here?" Nethin watched in silence as Admiral Gang Gukong studied the newcomer's face. The Admiral's voice rumbled low and measured. "Black Prison," he repeated. "It sits alongside Steel Bone and Iron Fist, all honorifics from our old age. Titles like Qingji, Chigo, Huangyuan, none of them have anything to do with beasts. That tells me he served in my generation. When I was promoted to Navy Admiral, this man quietly retired and disappeared, and yet here he is today in the Holy Land. If you still doubt me, ask Wu Laoxing." Black Prison offered no reply, only a cool nod, and soared off toward the red Earth continent below. Nethin realized the implication. This was no ordinary officer. He answered only to Im's personal guard, a rank even above CP0, known only to Wu Laoxing. Admiral Gang could pry loose many hidden truths within the world government, but without noble lineage or a Tianlong mandate, there were still vaults of secrets forever beyond his reach. In the Navy's hierarchy, admirals can advance to fleet admiral or even grand marshal, but the rank of emperor is strictly off limits. The grand marshals stand at the very summit of power, and the 5 elders have long since secured their thrones there. Steelbones rolled his massive shoulders, aware of enough of the truth to fill in the blanks, but uninterested in dwelling on it. His duty was clear: serve the world government, defend its interests, and keep the peace. Nothing more, nothing less. News of their defeat ignited the five elders' wrath. For a fleeting moment, they teetered on the brink of ordering the entire navy to crush the ghost hand pirates. Yet cooler heads prevailed. Mobilizing a full-scale operation would demand every fleet in the Grand Line, from admirals down to the smallest escort ships. Even dispatching just one admiral with a token squadron risked dragging the navy into an uncontrollable war. And the other four emperors were watching. The mere hint of a large-scale assault on the ghost hand pirates would invite them, or some other hidden power, to strike at Marine headquarters in the ensuing chaos. Such a conflagration could engulf the world. Worse still was the unpredictable factor staring back at them: Nethan. His very existence was a thorn in the Grand Marshal's side, far more troublesome than any pirate crew. As long as he remained free to act, the world government's carefully balanced order stood on precarious ground. The elders could no longer afford to ignore him. Chapter 10. The Unmatched Fugitive. No one could deny it. In one-on-one combat, Nethan was the strongest man alive. Even Steel Gukong himself, renowned across the seas for his unrivaled martial prowess, acknowledged it. At his absolute prime, Gukong might have stood a chance against Nethan, but age had dulled his edge, and nowadays he was clearly outclassed. Yet Nethan's greatest talent wasn't just raw fighting power, it was escape. Nobody in the world could snatch victory from his grasp and hold it. He'd proven that time and again, most recently at the gates of Marine headquarters. There, Steel Gukong, the Sipido chief, and Wang Ting's elite inner guard lay in wait, three of the Navy's most formidable assets. And yet, Nethan strolled in, plucked a handful of devil fruits from the core storeroom, and vanished before any of them could react. It was the stuff of legends, a man so powerful he could challenge the strongest, and so elusive he could slip past an entire fleet's defenses as casually as if he were taking a day trip. Combat prowess and survivability all rolled into one. Pirates whispered that he was a living fusion of Whitebeard's strength and Kaido's cunning, a lethal combination nobody could outwit. But now that remarkable feat had ignited panic within Marine headquarters. In the council chamber, Vice Admiral Wu Laoxing slammed his palm on the conference table, his fury barely contained. "Tell me the status of the storeroom," he barked. The officer in charge of the core warehouse stood trembling, sweat beading on his brow. With a quavering voice, he delivered the grim tally. 14 devil fruits are missing. 6 are ancient zoan types, 3 are standard zoans, 2 are beast zoans, and worst of all, 2 are Logia-class natures. At that moment, Wu Laoxing's face creased with veins. Every one of those devil fruits was considered irreplaceable, and all of them, stolen with such audacious ease, had vanished along with Nethan. The sheer brazenness of it was enough to make even the seasoned admirals tremble. The Navy had met its match in a man who neither feared their strongest champions nor respected their most secure vaults, and all they could do now was hunt him down. Nethan's recovery operation. In every corner of the world, devil fruits circulated like precious gems. Ordinary fruits, paramecia and zoan varieties could be bought and sold openly, even by celestial dragon families who used them as expensive toys for their slaves. But ancient zoans, mythical zones, and natural logias were in a class of their own. Over the centuries, the world government had managed to secure only a dozen of those rarest specimens. Lose one, and you risk igniting a power shift in the balance of nations. That knowledge weighed heavily on Nethan. He'd known, from Steel Gukong's encrypted report, that someone had tipped off the Marines. A thorough search of the core vault was imminent. When the order came down, he steeled himself. No panic, no blame. Under his supervision, the Marines tore the fortress apart, lifting carpets, dismantling cabinets, even prying up sections of the floor. Their prize, several larger fragments of shatter, and devil fruits, each piece still humming with latent power. It wasn't the whole. The vault's finest specimens were gone, but it was something. As long as no one devoured mismatched shards, these remnants could still awaken an ability. Half a day later, Nethan stood in the grand hall of Sky Island Bika's palace, his dark hair damp from a quick bath and his body wrapped in a simple, loose-fitting robe. The chatter of attendants died down the moment he appeared. Before him, on a smooth obsidian table, Lay the recovered fragments, 3 cracked paramecias, 2 broken zoans, and a single split shell of a natural logia. Robin, perched on a low stool, turned one of the cracked fruits in her hands. Her expression was calm, almost clinical, as she examined the fissures and whispered notes into a slate. "If the cell structure here is intact," she murmured, tapping the fruit's mottled surface, "the devil fruit properties should still be viable. We may even coax a full awakening, so long as the fragment remains whole." Gently, she set it back on its velvet cushion. The soft thud echoed in the silent hall. Nethan stepped forward, draped in steam and determination. He rested a hand on the table's corner and met Robin's steady gaze. "How do they look?" he asked. Robin pointed to the largest piece, a half shell of what had once been a flame zone. Its surface shimmered with faint embers. "This one has promise. The molecular structure is stable. If we administer it carefully, avoid exposure to seawater, and prevent cross-contamination, we can isolate the flammability. The other fragments will need to run similar tests. But I'm optimistic." Nethan exhaled, tension slipping out of his shoulders. Every second that passed without word of a total loss felt like a victory. "Excellent," he said softly. "Prepare the chambers. I want isolation wards ready by dusk. We'll begin the extraction protocol tonight." Robin inclined her head. As she gathered her tools, Nithan allowed himself a small, relieved smile. They hadn't recovered all the fruits, but they'd reclaimed enough to keep every major power broker at bay. And that, he thought, was the most precious thing of all. Nithan studied the 5 devil fruits laid out before him. Robin stood patiently at his side. Nithan reached for the first, an orb pulsing with pale, otherworldly light. "This is the soul fruit, isn't it?" he asked. "That's right," Robin confirmed. "Perfect." Nithan slipped it into his coat pocket. Though every devil fruit was valuable, none mattered more to him than the soul fruit. He turned to the remaining 4. "Tell me about these," he said. "What's the natural one?" Robin pointed to a storm-swirled fruit. "That's the hurricane fruit, a logia. It's one of the highest-tier fruits. Anywhere, anytime, you can summon gales and tempests." Nithan nodded, tucking away the image. "And the ancient species fruit? That's an ancient zoan," Robin explained, gesturing to a rugged, bronze-hued globe. "Its power is immense, far beyond a normal animal zoan, but it still lags behind the destructive potential of a logia or a mythical zone." "I see." Nithan massaged his temple. He couldn't help recalling the half-shattered fruits he'd already tested and the headaches they'd given him. "Next?" Robin prompted. "And the phantom beast one?" Nithan asked, leaning in. "That's the 9-tailed fox fruit, a mythical zone in the phantom beast category. It grants the user the form and abilities of the legendary 9-tailed fox, enhanced speed, cunning, and mystical charms." Nithan allowed himself a small smile. He'd gathered more rare devil fruits than he'd ever dared hope for, and with each new power came both promise and peril. Pocketing his notes on these 4 fruits, he prepared for the final discovery, the superhuman abilities still waiting to be revealed. Robin lifted the fruit, its surface inscribed with 9 sweeping, tail-like ridges, and held it up for Nethan to see. Nethan nearly choked on his water. "A 9-tailed fox fruit? You're kidding, right? Do things like that even exist?" Robin studied him with mild curiosity. "Phantom beasts are born of myth, but legends aren't always just stories. Whether they truly roam the world or live only in our imaginations, their power still takes shape, like this fruit." Nethan couldn't help a wry smile. He'd grown up on tales of giant Buddhas, fiery phoenixes, and bloodthirsty vampires, so why not a fox spirit? In a realm where the extraordinary was commonplace, a fruit-bearing 9 tails felt almost natural. Chapter 359, Devil Fruit Experiment. "What are you planning to do with these devil fruits?" Robin asked Nethan, studying the assortment laid out before him. Nethan considered her question thoughtfully. Even just the 2 ancient zone fruits could yield fighters on par with, or even surpassing, a vice captain. As for the hurricane fruit and the 9-tailed fox fruit, I'm going to hold off on those for now. He tapped his chin. Instead, I'll set the 2 ancient zone fruits aside as high credit rewards, with priority going to the giants. Robin arched an eyebrow. "Reward the giants?" "Exactly," Nethan said. "Giants already possess tremendous natural strength. If they awaken an animal-type devil fruit on top of that, their physical advantages multiply. They'd outclass ordinary humans by a wide margin. She nodded. And the other two? They'll stay locked away, for now. Nathan's expression grew serious. Chet, especially the hurricane fruit. I have special plans for it. He paused, recalling the legendary weather weapons created by Big Mom, Fire Cloud Prometheus and Thunder Cloud Zeus. Prometheus and Zeus are supremely powerful. They can't match a Navy admiral at full strength, but their offensive capabilities rival the weapons of the three disasters. I intend to study the hurricane fruit just as closely. Robin smiled. A wise precaution. Let me know if you need help with the experiments. Will do, Nathan replied, gathering the fruits with care. These devil fruits could reshape our entire power structure if we handle them correctly. Nathan leaned back in his chair, watching the storm clouds gather outside the window. You know, he said, those fire and thunder clouds are really just manifestations of the soul, combinations of the soul itself, its devil fruit power, and ordinary elemental energy. He tapped his fingers on the desk. If I use the hurricane fruit from the nature department to cast my own storm avatar, it could rival even a Navy admiral in raw power. Robin, seated across from him, nodded. Quietly, she reached into a hidden compartment and withdrew two devil fruits, the nine-tailed fox fruit and the hurricane fruit. She placed them side by side for a moment, then carefully locked them inside the steel safe built into the office wall. But no need to worry about giants at all, Nathan continued. Obviously, there must be a limit to how many of these avatars one person can create. After all, Big Mom only ever produced 2, maybe 3 at most. Understood, Robin said, clicking the safe's door shut. With a soft mechanical click, the fruits were secured once more. Nathan watched her work, then reached up to rub his chin thoughtfully. By the way, Robin, I need you to look into someone for me. Who is it? She asked. Leaning forward, he described the figure he'd glimpsed in the Holy Land, a man whose power bent gravity itself. As Nathan spoke, Robin sketched rapidly in her notebook, her pencil flying over the paper. It was almost exactly like this, Nathan said, pointing at the rough outline. He closed his eyes for a moment, recalling the man's chilling calm. Find out everything you can about him. Robin glanced up, determination in her eyes. Consider it done. Robin set down his pen, studied the sketch, and nodded. Tucking the drawing into his dossier, he strode from the office to summon his chief intelligence officer. He needed to trace the origins of this mysterious individual at once. Once Lord Rhodes had entrusted the hurricane fruit to Robin for safekeeping, and charged him with uncovering its unknown gravitational properties, he departed Sky Island Baika and made his way to Cake Island. The island's new base was fully operational. Tight patrols circled its perimeter, and every path was wired with listening devices. As Nathan stepped ashore, the on-duty guards snapped to attention and saluted crisply. Inside, the once-empty compound had blossomed into 3 distinct sectors. The first was the medical wing, entirely under Trafalgar Law's command. Here, gravely injured soldiers underwent advanced regenerative treatments, psychic surgery enhancements, and other experimental procedures. Detainees, both human and otherwise, were held for study in secure wards. Adjacent stood the Kaiser Research Institute, nominally run by Caesar Clown. In reality, Law retained veto power over all Caesar's projects, and a team of Law's aides shadowed the mad scientist's every move. No formula was tested, no sample analyzed without Law's explicit approval. Finally, the security hub served as the base's nerve center. From banks of surveillance monitors and encrypted communications arrays, Rhodes could deploy patrols, intercept enemy transmissions, and coordinate defenses at a moment's notice. Nathan paused at the hub's entrance, absorbing the hum of activity. Cake Island had come a long way, and so had he. The corridors of Sector 5 stretched before Nathan, humming with the latest generation of security wards. Though Caesar's core systems were physically segregated and kept under constant guard, no one trusted his potential for mischief. Vigilance here was without question. Sector 5 itself was the newest and largest district, devoted entirely to the manufacture of clones under the sole command of Officer Vince Muclegiu. Nathan's boots clacked against the polished floor as he neared the exit of the cloning facility. There, stepping into the bright fluorescent light, was Reiju, the young commandant overseeing the clone battalion. Lord Nathan, she greeted crisply, straightening from her salute. What brings you here? I need an update on Caesar, Nethan said, his gaze drifting toward the sealed holding cells beyond the adjacent doors. Then, after a beat, he added, "And our clone army, how large is it now?" Reiju's face brightened. "Thanks to ample resources, we've grown past 200 soldiers." "Excellent," Nethan replied with a nod. He offered her a faint, approving smile and reached out to tap her cheek gently, a habit born of long familiarity. Reiju met his gesture without hesitation. A playful curve appeared on her lips, and she flicked her tongue at the corner of her mouth, her eyes glinting with mischievous confidence. Nethan felt a momentary thrill at her boldness, but duty pulled him back. Straightening his posture, he gave her a polite nod. "Carry on, then. I'll be checking in again soon." With that, he turned and strode away, leaving Reiju to watch him go, her smile lingering in the corridor's bright light. Nethan strode straight through the corridors of Caesar's research wing, threw open the lab door without so much as a knock, and marched in. "Hey, mind knocking next time?" Caesar called out, turning away from the row of glinting test tubes in his hand. He stopped mid-frown, though, as soon as he recognized his visitor. A smug smile crept across his face. "My apologies, Lord Nethan. Right on schedule." Over the last several days, Caesar had been juggling two massive projects. On one front, he'd teamed up with Lieutenant Leiju to refine the physical abilities of their clone soldiers. On the other, he'd been working with Dr. Luo to push the boundaries of human physiology itself, an effort so complex that it had consumed virtually all his lab hours. Caesar set the test tubes down with a relieved sigh and gestured to a covered tray at the center of the workbench. "The object fusion devil fruit you asked me to synthesize, it's ready." Nethan stepped forward, lifted the cloth, and revealed the gnarled, swirling pattern of the fruit. He ran a finger over its rough bumps, nodded in approval, and said, "Excellent. Let's proceed to the next stage." With that, the two men turned their full attention to the devil fruit, anticipation crackling in the air as Caesar prepared his instruments and Nethan steeled himself for what was to come. Nethan drew the demon sword Murasame from his waist. With a slackening of his grip, the blade sank into the wooden deck with a solid thunk, pinning the sword's hilt to the floor. In his other hand, he produced the soul fruit, its mottled surface glinting in the lantern light. He held both artifacts before him, eyes narrowed on Caesar. "You're saying a paramecia, what you call a superhuman devil fruit, can be fused directly into the human body?" Nethan's voice was calm, but laced with skepticism. "I've heard of zoan fruits merging with animal subjects, but I've never seen anyone successfully graft a paramecia." Caesar met his stare steadily. He seemed to weigh each word. "I understand your doubts. I personally oversaw every zoan fusion experiment we ran. And recently," he nodded toward a small glass of water resting on a side table, "I performed a fusion trial with a paramecia fruit exactly the same way. The subject retained full use of its abilities and showed no adverse effects." Nethan spun to examine the glass. The flickering lamplight danced off its surface, but otherwise it looked unremarkable. "You tested the procedure already?" he asked, eyebrows arched. "Twice," Caesar replied with a rare hint of pride. "The fruit's essential properties can bind to human physiology. The sword stakes it in place, anchoring the fruit's energy long enough for the fusion to begin. After that, the blade is removed, and the fruit's power integrates seamlessly." He took a measured breath. "If you're uneasy, we can run another trial right now, on a volunteer." Nethan exchanged a look with his crewmates. The risk was enormous, but so was the reward. He sheathed Murasame, picked up the soul fruit, and squared his shoulders. "All right," he said. "Let's see if your theory holds up." Caesar cocked his head. "Where did you find these superhuman devil fruits?" Nethan, the pirate once called Ross, smiled and recovered his composure. As one of the four emperors, his influence stretched across every ocean, and it wasn't unusual for one of his crews to unearth a devil fruit. Low-tier paramecia fruits like this were common enough. They made for harmless experiments rather than prizes of value. He hadn't expected anything remarkable. He reached for the glass on the testing bench. The instant his fingers closed around it, a strange awareness prickled at the edges of his consciousness. This wasn't like the zoan fruits that turned objects into living creatures. Still, there was a pulse of life within the cup, as if the fruit itself were whispering back at him. Nethan tuned his mind to it. At his silent command, the glass quivered. Water sloshed, and then the vessel's walls rippled, uncoiling like steel springs. The cup sprang to life, bouncing and flexing in his hand with inexhaustible energy. A thin smile curved Nethin's lips. "Spring fruit," he murmured, satisfied. Not much of a name, perhaps, but the power behind it would be worth every test he had in mind. It seems there's no way Bellamy can show up. Doflamingo's already finished, too.